I've listened to your podcast. I feel like I kind of know you a little bit anyway. I've seen you a couple of times on YouTube.
Well, I've listened to you too, so I know a little bit about you too. We are acquaintances but never met. That's the new world we live in.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Pete Wakefield still. I was chatting, and you probably know Dan Stevens over here as well. I was saying to Dan, I mean, for a global sort of entity like fire, a phenomenon that's been with us since we came out the caves.
Yeah.
I suppose the skill of fighting fire, the evolution of the tactics of fire, particularly in the last probably 40 years, and the way the processes have changed, or we've become more scientifically aware, and they've changed at the same time. Two things have happened together, haven't they? You end up with, I would say, I mean, looking around, there's probably about 20, 30, I suppose, guys like you, and I think they are all guys, actually. I don't think there are many women like in this kind of space who've taken a real interest in the science and the tactics and backdraft, flashover, smoke, water misting, the whole kind of tactical stuff. John McDonough is there, isn't he? Shot Shan Rafael. Is it Michael Wright? Who did that kind of smoke and current stuff? You know
the nerd.
Yeah, that's like that. Yeah, well, I think it was Shan I was speaking to. It might have been John McDonough. I think what is interesting about you guys is because of the internet now, you can all connect with each other. You can all share ideas and you can all talk to each other. But what I think is also interesting is, I think Shan was saying this, breaking through to influencing strategic policy thinking of chief fire, whatever the equivalent of fire and rescue services, is still a challenge. Because I don't know what you find in your part of the world, but fire chiefs in the UK, a quarter of the country's fire chiefs haven't even got a fire service background. They were probably cops. There were different models around the world, and yet the thing fire, the phenomenon fire, is getting more dangerous, not less, more serious, not less. And I kind of think there's a risk of a gap opening up. Would you agree with all that, Lars?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's different to any other industry. Sometimes you throw down this, you read about the fire service is so conservative. Like if you look at a plumber or whatever, how much change the fire service is subjected to or initiating on a daily basis. It's constant. It's this constant churn in every area. I mean, so I think sometimes we give ourselves sort of a unfair assessment of how conservative you are. It's just that the rate of change is happening in such a scale that it's hard to keep up. Again, look at all the different areas that the fire service has adopted to responding to, just the technology advances and so on, and it's just going to go faster and faster, probably. So in a sense, I think it's unfair to say that it's hard to sort of reach the top layer to sort of affect change. I think we just go like, we are probably most prone to change sort of business there is, at least like public service, I would guess. But on the other hand, of course, it's frustrating as sort of, if I consider myself sort of nerd in the sense that, like we have a speciality, we focus on that, and then it's hard because you're not getting the traction you want because you think you have good ideas. Of course, that's challenging. But then you take the other side, you're a fire chief, you have 15 different nerds all wanting 15 different things. The live water rescue guy wants this, the water rescue, the hazmat team wants this, and there's the politicians wants this, and you're sitting there like being squeezed from all directions. And I wouldn't. I'm generalizing here, not just UK. I wouldn't put the blame on fire chiefs, not at all. I think it's a sucky position. And from what I understand, you've been a fire chief. I think it's a sucky position.
17 years as a fire chief.
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, not having been one, but I've no desire to become one. It's a sucky position because you're squeezed between a rock and a hard place most of the time. So it's time to choose. I would put most of the blame on sort of the nerds. We haven't given, if we're failing on affecting change, we haven't given enough valuable reasons to. Like, it's simple as that. Like, if you just go if you go to the fire chief and just scream, I want this and this, we need bigger container facilities. Go like, but you haven't proved your point. What's the point? Are we getting better with this? Are we getting worse? I mean, so I put a lot of blame on sort of the instructor level of not being able to justify whatever we need, change in tactics, new type of training, more training, because it's not enough to just go say, like, hey, I think this is good. Let's do it.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we're in danger of having a conversation without getting into the podcast thing if we're not careful. Yeah.
Well, so I'm recording, so I mean, for me, it's a good way. We could just dive into it. Because it is a fascinating topic, and of course, it leads into what the subject I wanted to talk about, at least as a base point. But we feel free to go off on tangents. I have no problem with that. But I really want to talk about Grenfell and sort of your experience with it. But that, of course, ties into like tactics and strategies and changing and what makes sense and not. Yeah. But we could definitely start with that because, from what I understand, you started working with the Grenfell Inquiry, of course, afterwards, and being one of the expert witnesses and working to trying to sort of make sense of the fire response side. And that's sort of I'm not that very interested in the other parts of Grenfell. Of course, as a big incident in many different areas, sort of the fire prevention side and building construction, all these. But of course, my focus is mostly about the response. Because I'm always trying to benchmark my ideas on typically the everyday incident, but also the freak events. Like, what would happen if I apply my frameworks, my ideas, my thoughts in this situation? Would it make sense? Like in hindsight, like would my so. And Grenfell was no different in that sense, but an incident where I tried to sort of benchmark my ideas. But to do that, you, of course, have to have all the bits and pieces of what did the first crew see? What happened? What was the situation? So if it's okay with you, I would love to start just taking back into sort of ground zero at Grenfell, like the alarm coming in, and from the emergency service perspective, what happened? Like, what was their experience?
No problem at all, Lars. I think, well, firstly, I completely agree. I think one of the, I suppose I do sessions in the UK on the fire for sort of middle level commanders and senior commanders, really. And I started doing them. I was asked to kind of do it, so I've developed this sort of almost forensic unpicking of different elements of it, which has been really interesting. And it speaks to the point I want to make, which is that I don't think we often enough unpick major events on a globe, because ultimately a fire is a fire, isn't it? And I appreciate difference in building construction and techniques, but broadly speaking, in most parts of the world, they're either concrete, bricks and mortar with a bit of glass thrown in and a few other materials now, but they are the same, largely speaking, just the different mix in different parts of the world because of culture and geography and history. But largely speaking, the physics are very, very similar, if not kind of identical. So I think there is a lot to learn from unpicking what really happened. And I compare Grenfell, predominantly the first report, there was a book written by a guy in the UK called Matthew Said. He's one of these kind of leadership guys, and he wrote a book called Black Box Thinking. Have you ever heard of it at all?
It rings a bell, but I can't recall exactly.
So what he did, Matthew, he was frustrated. I don't know if it was a family member or somebody, but he was frustrated about problems he observed in health services where mistakes were continually made and people were dying, and it was really just human error most of the time. And so he looked at the aviation industry, about which most people would agree has massively transformed its safety record. It had to, didn't it? Because Flying at 37,000 feet in an aluminium tube feels risky. So if there's loads of these things crashing, you're unlikely to sell flights, aren't you? So there was a real commercial incentive to changing that idea.
It's bad PR.
It's great. It's not great, put it that way. And it can put pressure on your booking system, put it that way. And so his learning was that to radically change culture to do two things. One, to not argue about what happened, because you'll have been to many debriefs, Lars. You'll spend the first 2.5 hours actually agreeing what happened. No, it wasn't like that. No, we're in the back. There's a firefighter do that. They'll argue about what happened, and you'll lose all your time. But then you've run out of time by the get around to why and what are we going to learn from it. His proposition was the airline industry, they've got the data, black box data. So they don't argue what happened. They then can get into why and do we understand the kind of causational chain. And I would say that in the UK, there's never been a fire in our history for which there's as much CCTV footage, mobile telephone footage, BA telemetry, body cam footage from the cops who all have body cameras, and interviews, witness statements. It came as close as we're ever going to get to a black box recording of a major fire, probably the biggest fire since the Second World War. And so I think your point is learning from unpicking these kinds of disasters, wherever they are in the world, there's a tremendous amount of learning. So that's, I suppose, the first setting of the scene. So with Grenfell, I think the Grenfell story is also worth saying. It kind of started about 8 years before Grenfell, because there was a major fire in London in a building, a high-rise building in London called Lakanal House. Have you ever heard of the Lakanal House fire?
Because of Grenfell, sort of the inquiry.
Because of Grenfell. So it was nowhere near identical. It wasn't a replica, but it was a fire in a block of flats, a strange layout to the flat. It was a kind of mezzanine levels. There was like a scissors layout, as it were, with an upstairs and a downstairs. It had some form of cladding underneath the window, the kind of we call spandrel underneath the window, and the fire went up first, and then because of material falling and open windows, it was a very warm day. It spread up and down, so it had first of all breached a compartment, and secondly, it had spread in an unusual fashion. There were several people trapped. So in the UK, because we've only got single staircases, our base of designing high-rise buildings since the 1950s and 60s, when we started putting them up, was based upon the sort of stay-put concept. It's used different things, isn't it? But was it stay and defend? The various
but it's very common in Europe and
it's very common. So basically, the idea you should be safe in a box for 2 hours, and that's the end of that. Once you breach compartmentation, it's all gone. And at Lakanal House, for several reasons, the compartmentation was breached and 3 people were trapped. And then what that demonstrated was their fire control team, the advice they were given was still stay put, stay put, stay put. And because the learnings from the inquest and things afterwards was you can no longer rely, certainly in a high-rise building, on the idea stay put because you've got two hours to do that. You can't rely upon that anymore, especially if compartmentation has been breached. Secondly, that message that we always used to give, we call it fire survival guidance, and we tell them, block up the doors, get near a window, give them that kind of life-saving advice. And the final bit was always the firefighters are on their way to get you. Stay there. We're coming to get you. Well, 6 people died, and so it was clear that was the wrong message. You're giving people a false sense of security, especially in a high-rise building, because there's no guarantee that the firefighters are going to be able to kind of come and get you. And there were several requirements on that: new training, new equipment in terms of ways of recording people trapped in buildings, new procedures in terms of the fire control response, the emergency response of the call operators in the call centre, and a radically different approach to thinking about evacuation versus stay put. To the extent that there was new guidance written by London Fire Brigade that kind of brought all that out, as it were. So the turnout to Grenfell, the procedures in place for Grenfell Tower had essentially, in theory at least, been shaped by the fire in Lakanal House 7 years earlier and the coroner's inquest that had a whole lot of recommendations about training differently, officers understanding when a fire has breached compartment, what does that mean, what might you do, when should you think about evacuating, etc., etc. And the public inquiry found none of that training had happened, and essentially none of the learnings from Lakanal had actually been embedded in the London Fire Brigade at all, which is why it was so critical. So it's worth just kind of, before we kind of get into the incident, realising, as all these things have a backstory, and this is the operational backstory, and it speaks to your point right at the start, Lars. How are we learning from history? How are we learning from events in other parts of the world, or indeed events in our own countries, as it were, has gone by? That kind of history. Do
you think? So before you move on, then, do you think that this sort of, we go back in history, saying this stay put policy, which I would, from my perspective, say was very common in Europe. Would you say, or have you had any experience or thoughts on this changed within the UK or outside the UK, that this starting to change before Grenfell? Was it just the London Fire Brigade who was slow to react? Was it, like, did you have any?
I mean, the stay put. I mean, the London Fire. London has 2/3 of all the high-rise buildings in the UK. Yeah. But the major cities, Birmingham in particular, Manchester, to a slightly lesser extent, Liverpool. But most major cities have quite a lot of high-rise buildings, and in particular, high-rise residential buildings. It was a rapid technique of building post-war when there was a population boom. Yeah. So fires in high-rise buildings have been very, very common throughout the country, even though, to be fair, London had more of them. Yeah. And the sort of stay put, evacuate thing. I mean, I was an operational officer in the West Midlands, in the city centre of Birmingham, and we had dozens of blocks of flats, and actually we had on many occasions we'd evacuate because the bin chutes would catch fire, and the kids had. They'd pinch the dry risers, the landing valves, vandalism. The same problems are there across Europe, aren't they, really? So all those problems have existed in many respects. That was sort of surprised. There wasn't essentially that much radically new or different at Grenfell, except for one thing. They clad the building in this aluminium cladding. Yeah. So from a collective fire service point of view, essentially the problem wasn't really fire services problem. It was the building controls, the testing of products, all those other stuff, all those other parts of the inquiry, looking at the regime that approves building products, approves building designs, approves works that are going on buildings. So the fundamental failings of Grenfell was a pack of cards sort of situation, or Swiss cheese lining up whole situation. On every other bit of the building control, the cladding, there were very few self-closing devices. Those that were in the building didn't work, etc., etc. And those will be very common features of buildings all over the world, including in Europe. So I think if there's one central point, it's the fact that this stuff was clad in cladding, and essentially, if you look at the kind of calorific value, the heat release rate, it was almost identical to petrol. So Grenfell was really wrapped in solidified petrol. That fundamentally, that's what caused the speed and the movement of the fire, and the operational problem, in a nutshell, was that the London, nobody from the London Fire Brigade clocked. Well, I meant that. Well, A, clocked that it was happening. And were just frozen in shock. And B, what did that mean? And what it meant was there was no chance whatsoever of putting that fire out. So the chairman's view was they should have had a plan. They should have and he never did say they should have had a plan B, or they would have. Everybody would have lived. He accepted. You were never going to have a fire like that at Grenfell where people all survived. There were always going to be people who tragically perished. His point was there were many, many occasions with a potential to think about a different plan, i.e. trying to evacuate, as ever hard that might be, it was still better than telling people to stay there and just continually thinking about fighting a fire that you were never going to put out.
I want to get back to that definitely for sure, because that for sure is a sucky scenario.
Yeah, it's building no illusions.
Yeah,
this was just an unbelievably horrible and difficult situation. You know, it's we can unpick this. In fact, there's a great quote from the. Do you know that terrible incident where is it Anders Breivik who shot those kids in Norway? Yeah, Breivik. Yeah, they did a report into that, and the English translation. There's a fantastic expression. It says, "Please don't judge." You know, we talk about the people involved in this, and it might sound harsh. It's a black box thing. But to learn, we have to confront failure and mistakes. If we don't confront failure, we're never going to learn. There's a great expression. It says, coincidence determined which individuals found themselves the focus of attention in the aftermath of that terrible event. And I think the same is absolutely true of Grenfell. Coincidence determined that it was the London Fire Brigade. It could have been several of the buildings anywhere. Coincidence determined which officers were the ones that happened to turn up on the night. The problem is much more systemic for all of us to think about, rather than criticising the individual officers concerned.
Oh, for sure, and I think that that's you always find these, but and you look at trends and so and you see this and you go like, could this have happened anywhere else? And you go like, yeah, could have happened a lot of different places, like because you see the systemic things. But I think when you talked about the things about the stay put policy and these things, I think it's an interesting question to think about, and I would like to hear your sort of thoughts on it. You can either, like, if you took a look at two extremes, you can even say that the fire service should anticipate that the buildings are behaving according to codes, that the codes are sort of sound and reasonable, so they work, people behave reasonably, and the expectation is, under those circumstances, the fire service should be able to do a sort of a good job. There will still be fires, there will still be complex situations, but sort of the buildings sort of work with, and you sort of know what to expect. Or on the other side, the fire service should be there when the codes are not written in a well-mannered. They are behind, the technology advancement. The people are not behaving as they should be, and it's and it's been modified to, and it's illegal, illegal operation going on in the building, and blah blah blah. Like, the fire service should expect that this is the worst day ever, and nothing goes according to plan. And it's sort of because one is, of course, entirely different to train for, to budget for, and everything. You go like, how do you look at that problem? Because in this case, the building did not behave like the fire service at least expected it at that point.
Well, well, that's a good question. It didn't behave how the London Fire Brigade expected it, or the officers expected it. But then you've got to ask the question, well, why did they expect that? It was on fire. What did they think it was going to do? And several occasions, and so you made it, there is a thing in the Midlands, so it didn't behave as the code said. Well, in this country, essentially, codes disappeared in the 1980s. And by the way, they have in several parts of the world. So what you described, so in the UK and several other parts of the world, it was accepted that you stifled creativity and innovation and new design and all the rest of it by having rigid codes that says your staircase has got to be that far apart and that wide, that precision, that kind of codification of everything is one approach. And I think parts of the States, there are parts of the world that still codify to that degree. But the majority have gone to what they call a kind of performance outcome. So in Grenfell was like that. The building regulations in this country say a fire should not be allowed to pass across the face of a building. Now, how you as a developer decide to fulfill that is entirely up to you. And so in this case, and there was a 7-year debate about whether this cladding passed or didn't pass something called a standard, because there isn't really a standard. There's an outcome, and there's a sort of testing regime. So it's utterly reliant in our country on the people making a judgment about this building design and these products, knowing enough about fire behaviour and fire development to judge whether it would pass our building regulations. Because there isn't really a code. And so that's the problem, Lars. In every country it varies, and even where you've got a code, because of the way things are changing, it'll probably be quite a loose code. It won't be anywhere near as precise as we used to be. Now, if you've only ever spent your life operational, building codes have no bearing on you. They're sort of there's something over there, aren't they? It might be what your engineers do while you fight. In the UK, we call it the black art. So people in the black art do the fire safety and fire. And so most operational officers have very little to no experience of, we call it fire regulation, the codification, the regulation of buildings. So the first question is, so where do they get their expectation from? So when they say a building didn't behave as expected, it behaved exactly as all of our fire safety officers would have expected it to behave. And in fact, a week before the Grenfell Tower fire, all the fire safety officers in the London Fire Brigade were given a PowerPoint presentation with about 50 slides, and there are pictures that look exactly like the Grenfell Tower fire. There's a diagram that is pretty much identical to the fire. That diagram was taken from a document published by the National Fire Chiefs Council in 2013, so 4 years before Grenfell, a 185-page guidance document on cladding fires in cladding. And it talks about fires in Australia, in Dubai. And again, the diagram shown to all the fire safety officers of the London Fire Brigade 1 week before Grenfell was taken from a document that was published by our own fire chiefs ourselves, explaining exactly what happens in buildings with aluminium cladding. And it says you should expect fires to break out unexpectedly. You should expect them to spread very rapidly. You should expect the windows to fall out and they complain and fly. You should expect the cladding to fall. You should expect secondary fires on the ground because it falls. So all these things that happened at Grenfell 4 years previously, 180-page guidance document off the fire chiefs for all fire rescue services said exactly what you should expect with this stuff. And that's what happened at Grenfell. So your point, what do you expect, is a good question, isn't it? I think the challenge then comes, we were chatting earlier, weren't we? There is so much. I mean, this guide, as well as all the stuff on fires, it's got water rescues, car rescues, CBRN, hazmats. This is the problem. We write reams and reams of policy, guidance, documentation. So when something like a public inquiry comes and looks at that one slice, that fire in cladding or that crisis there or whatever, they're only looking at this piece of guidance that can say a huge amount. The fact that you'd no time to get around because you were distracted by these 78 other pieces of guidance over here is not really what a public inquiry is about. And that's one of the problems when things like this happen. And it can feel very unfair because it feels like there's no account being taken of all this other stuff. You're just looking at this. And that's true. You are. So, but I suppose boiling that back, your point, Lars, is where do you end up, I guess, if you can't rely upon a building behaving as expected and you can't develop your training and tactics with confidence that that's how it's be, then the alternative is you just got to be prepared for absolutely everything. If I'm honest, I think that is the reality of life today. And what I mean by being prepared for anything, this is where it comes back to, I suppose, your specialisms. What you need to understand isn't procedures particularly or tactics. It is things like our fire's behaving. What's the smoke telling you, and what does this mean to your thinking about your tactics? So you come back to, I think, the need for a deeper level of knowledge and understanding about the process of fire, combustion, smoke, water, how you use water in these different guises. You come back into the territory that you are in, and it really isn't now something reserved for nerds like yourself, Lars. Do you know that? I suppose it really isn't a nerdy preoccupation, in my view, anyway.
No.
It's not a nerdy preoccupation anymore. It's core. This is what I think this is what all firefighters need to know more about, and actually, incident commanders need to understand a lot more about the fire science and what's going on with this complex building, and they're never going to predict it, but they recognise that's going on. I don't even know why that's happening. Yeah. Well, I can see it's happening, and I need to do something different just to be able to create that trigger.
Yeah, and I of course agree that the knowledge and be able to anticipate things that aren't standard is needed. But I'm trying to be the devil's advocate, seeing that the average firefighter, the average officer, the average fire chief, all different levels, but have so many things going on. Like an average part-time firefighter has a super limited amount of training time. It's just not possible. They would just quit. And we can't afford to have full-time everywhere. And then we have full-time. And they have other duties, not just response to fires. They have fire prevention and everything. Yeah. Typically, full-time fire chief, they're full-time staff around the world, they're pretty lazy. That's just my concern. You can stress them a fair bit more before that. And they should pride themselves being better. So full-time, you can squeeze out a lot more in the system, generally speaking. And especially, but you go down to most firefighters think they're decent firefighters, and if you think they're decent, you're not that interested in becoming better. Like I'm pretty fucking good. Why should I train? So I think we have a self-image problem, where most people think they're good when they're actually not, and it's because most incidents we go to are not very challenging. So you develop this sort of complacency that it sort of works out, and we cover for each other because that's what humans do. When Johnny messes up, we sort of covered it up for him because we don't want anything to shit on us when we fail. So it's just self-preservation to cover for anyone else, and it's just this cycle of complacency that most fire services find themselves in because they haven't had a Grenfell, at their doorstep recently.
Absolutely, and they haven't been, their actual performance hasn't been looked at in any detail. So you're absolutely right. If we had black boxes and body cams, and an independent person looked at every incident. Yeah. Objectively, and in a way, for me, that was part of the privilege. I had the privilege of looking in from outside, and I was careful to try not to abuse that privilege. But by the same token, 72 people died. Yeah, sure. So I had a responsibility to lift the lid on some of these things, not just sort of say, there, it's all okay, you all did a great job. Of course, several did. There was great bravery. Yeah. But again, a lovely quote from the report is, bravery, the level of bravery and commitment shown cannot disguise and cannot hide the material deficiencies in command and thinking and performance on this incident. Two things can be true, can't they? Yeah, people can be incredibly brave and committed and cock up at one and the same time, at the same within minutes of each other. And so you have to confront these. It's that black box thing again, Lars. So I completely agree with that. The final thing I'll say before coming back into the incident itself, I guess, is I do believe this is where new technology can really help. So when I was a fire chief in Manchester, early 2010, 11, that kind of time period, so 15 years ago now, I really bought into the cold cutting concept, as it were. I mean, there were several bits of kit, Cobra, but there's now more than one. Yeah, there are multiple manufacturers. But you'll be very familiar with the kind of cold cutting kit, and we put it on the run on every pump in Manchester. We were going through what's called austerity at the time, facing lots and lots of cuts, and I took the view, if we're going to be sending fewer firefighters and fewer pumps overall, now to keep people safe, we'd have to radically change how we actually fight a fire. So if we've not got 5 people on the first crew, or we've not got 10 people in the first 2, we're only going to have 8. The fire's the same. So what technology can we bring in to fight a fire differently? So we moved to thermal scanning, very much what some of the Swedish kind of models are. Thermal scanning, you figure out where the fire is, and then you punch through, drop the temperature, then you can move in with a positive pressure ventilation fan. So and we changed the PPE, etc. We went to 22 mil hose reel, so it was a much more holistic kind of reorientation of the tactics of firefighting. And your point about part-time, that was a full-time fire service. If anything, I thought it was more applicable for part-time, because ultimately, you rock up, you might have 2 or 3 people. Again, I don't know about in Europe, but the occasion you might only have 2 or 3 people. And and actually nowadays, because of the speed fire, we always say, well, what if there's people waiting to be rescued? And of course, that remains possible. But it's a rarer phenomenon, isn't it? You know, when you're hitting a flash over in 5 or 6 minutes, by the time we get there, if people are still trapped, their chances aren't great, are they, unfortunately? That's why we always do criticize it. And really, what you want to do is minimal damage and keep the firefighters safe. And, you don't want heroes, do you? And so, actually, the cold cutting, just punch through the door, the wall, the window. You know, what damage are you going to do? If anything...
Oh, for sure. For limited crews, I think it's a great tool. Absolutely
fantastic.
Yeah.
But do you know what was interesting? Culturally... nightmare. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. They still wanted to kick down doors. That kind of your point earlier. That self-identified. Big.
I've been part of it, and I've been part of it from all sides. So no, that's a whole different topic that we could get into.
Your point about the culture is
for sure. For sure.
Yeah,
culture is a huge thing. I mean, if you don't fix your culture, you're gonna mess. You're gonna have struggle with everything you do. And it is a problem, but I think that we should go down a rabbit. I want to stay to this one before we get into. I want to touch on one thing more before we get into the actual Grenfell. When you talked about assessing evaluation, I'm just going to give me an anecdote, because I did a first anecdote. I was the incident commander at a fire, and we went to a fire, and there were lots of things happening at a fire that went wrong. So I was trying to be self-critical, but also you sort of take the blame, because it's very hard for me to point fingers at individual things at the fireground that I think didn't do well. So I sort of put the blame on me in the report, and write a really good report, and also write a news article for our internal newspaper for a region. And nobody reads that besides not even the fire service read it, really, but but they can read it.
But it makes you feel better.
Yeah. So we get it out there anyway. But anyway, so the reality was that the newspaper, the local newspaper, got a hold of it, and they read the article, and it's basically the headline in the paper that time was "Firefighters spraying water in the wrong house." Because that's what we did. We put water in a house that wasn't fire damaged because of communication errors, and sort of there was sort of like a half logical reason why that messed up, but it was still wrong, and it was true. And the fire chief got me into the office, said, "Lars, I don't want you to write those kind of articles anymore, because this is not good. Like nobody's happy about this. The house owner is not happy about this. The insurance company is not happy. Your colleagues are not happy. The public think we're just clowns. Like, nobody's happy at this." So we have this, and it was not the first, but it was one of those key moments where I realized, it's really hard to be altruistic in the sense that in the grand scheme, we try to get better, because it's when you start digging under the surface, very few people in that sort of system really wants to be honest about mistakes, because it's short term. It's just a mess. It just takes too much. It's too much reasons to say no. So I think it's really hard, because the second one, I was asked to do an investigation, and this is not what I do. I'm not a forensic investigator, but I was, from a tactical perspective, look at this incident and look at what would you have done differently, how would you learn. But it ended up me sending the report to the fire chief's personal email with all the improvements, so it couldn't be tracked to official channels, because he didn't want anyone to find out. He wanted to implement everything. Like, the intention was, we're going to implement all this, we're going to take it, but we have to do it sort of quietly under the book. Otherwise, if the insurance company get a hold of it, if the newspapers get a hold of it, if the wrong people in the organization get a hold of it, this is just a can of worms we don't want to open up. We want to learn, but we have to sort of just try to work against the system to make it happen. And I want to get your feet on that, like this, and I talked to like real, just formally in like evaluation of incidents and so on. They all say the same thing. Like, it's really hard to be honest. Like, it's like you're gonna, if you do it wrongly, you're never gonna do another evaluation in your life again. Like, it's like, how do you think about these? Like, you've touched upon a little bit these, like, the incentives to be honest for the greater good.
So I think this is where things like modern kit like body cams and video footage is really helpful, because for several reasons. One, you take away all the debate and the argument about what happened. Have you come across a thing called cognitive dissonance? Have you
oh, for sure.
So
I have a lot of it.
You're batting against that. Yeah, you're batting against that as well, aren't you? By the time you talk, by the time you've got a group of firefighters trying to recount the incident, whatever, because of cognitive dissonance, culture, etc., you've all ended up agreeing that something that did happen didn't by the time you even got to the end of it, really.
It's magically hard to get to the truth.
It is. But if there's a video, first of all, it's there, as it were, in black and white. I know there's fake news, but reality is it's there. Secondly, because you all then looking at the thing together, you all almost physically turn. Yeah. So what you've done, you've neutralised. Yeah. It's not me saying, actually, you know, and however much body language you use, because we're animated, you can't. You end up pointing, and just all that subtle. It becomes a combative interaction with people. Yeah. And again, we're mainly blokes. There's a very blokey testosterone dimension, competitive, kind of edgy thing to it. So the other value about having video is you kind of neutralise all of that here, and you sort of say, crikey. Yeah. So you end up almost talking to this inanimate object, the screen or whatever, and sometimes not even talking and facing each other can be of value, because you're really talking to somebody else and saying, how on earth did you do that? But you're not. There's no eye contact, so he doesn't feel threatened by it. Yeah. So I think thinking through the kind of how you can be clever about learning styles using video and using little tactics and tools is really useful to do. And that's what I found useful about Grenfell, chatting to crews, because it's not them, and I do make the point, you know, coincidence determined, it could be you, then they can then look at it and think, poor bugger, you know, they're not thinking, oh, what a mess that is. At first they can start thinking, what? And then they go, actually, it's a fair point. What would I have done in that situation? And so I come back to the point at the start, Lars. We really don't do enough honest unpacking, critical reviewing of stuff. And if it's ours, you've also, you know, if it's your job, and it was last week, you've got litigation, you've got lawyers, there are actual practical risks. Whereas you can make the same points doing perhaps some case study, but it needs to be a real world case study that everyone can agree happened. You know, coming up with some incident that's almost innocuous is a waste of time. So I think it is possible, Lars. I think you can learn it, but I think you need to almost find proxy or Trojan horses, I guess, tools that you can pull the learning from, and it's not then being confrontational in any way or challenging people's professionalism, because people just get the backs up, don't they? Just get defensive.
Yeah, no. As an instructor, I mean, that was one of the biggest problems I had. I still have the problem, of course, but to a lesser extent. But because even in training, you end up with this argument that I interpreted this way, therefore I was right to do this, and you end up trying to argue not the proper procedure, tactics, whatever it might be, or that, because we can't even agree on how to interpret the situation, and that's just training where the stakes are very low.
I mean, in Manchester, the best thing we ever did, we brought body cams into training. We brought body cams in 10, 15 years ago. And with drone technology nowadays, for training events, film them from above. Just film them all. Yeah. The more you film, and actually, it's cheap and cheerful to edit this stuff nowadays, isn't it?
I know you got cheap.
The data protection all day, but the more you can use this kind of the black box idea, the more you can shove stuff through something that's metaphorically a black box. Yeah. So it's not me or you. It's telling us this is what happened. Now, do we all agree that wasn't a good thing, or that was So you can talk about it in an abstract way, which depersonalizes it, and you can get the learning out in that way. Because everybody just gets a bit macho, don't they?
No, I think everybody's human. Nobody wants to be wrong, and then there's people who less want to be wrong, but nobody likes to be wrong. That's just like, I love to change. Like, nobody loves to change. That's just a lot of bullshit.
So you said about change. I talk about sort of change. We do a lot of change, and I have people say, "Oh, change." You've been consultants in, and they do these old fancy plans. And I always sort of say, has anybody got a life partner? Who's going to go home tonight to a life partner? A straight, gay, man, whatever. Who's going to go home tonight to a life partner? And you say, right, so when you get home tonight, just make a very simple suggestion. Just say, do you know what? Just for a change, let's swap the sides of the bed that we sleep on. I'll sleep on that side tonight, and you sleep on this side. Just look at the reaction you get from that. Just simple thing. Now, the person that loves you most in the world, they've chosen to spend their life with you, and yet you still pee them off simply by suggesting, let's change the side of the bed. Yeah. Why do you think then, when you're changing working patterns, hundreds of years of history, they're going to go, whoopee-doo, let me do this change.
Let's go. Like, I'm all aboard.
Yeah.
I love being wrong in the past. I love being wrong. Like that. It's just it feels so good to be wrong for 20 years.
So try it with the person who loves you most. See how you go on there, and then think about people who don't really like you very much.
But it is, and I think we should always have this sort of not being the devil's advocate about sort of Grenfell and so on, but we should always have this sort of like, change is hard. Adopting change, it's practically hard, it's technically, it's budgetly hard, and we are doing constantly this change. So when there's a report coming out, lithium batteries do this and this, and you have to have this tool, and you have to have this, and you need to be 9 people to do this. You're trying to run everywhere at the same time, and of course that doesn't work.
It's relentless. You're right.
Yeah. So I'm not. So again, we should be at the. You have to have these two things at the same time. A change is really hard, but it's necessary, and we have to do it. And sort of, it's both are true at the same time. But yes, let's go back to Grenfell.
Final thing I said before we get into Grenfell, I think it's really important though, because often firefighters, we get insular, we talk to each other a lot, and the acid test is. So what a public inquiry is looking at you on that night, whoever you were on that night. My experience with this one, and I think they're all the same, is there is an understanding life is complicated and difficult, and the resources are budgets, etc. And I also want to do kind of training on this. In the end, constantly remember, if what you're doing is about trying to save people's lives, and you can explain just why you did what you did with at least some credibility in a way, even if you're not working to a procedure, because in Grenfell the things that worked were outside of any procedures, but yet the people that did that were commended. There's a great comment about the senior officer. The strategy was bold and necessary. That was a comment of the chairman, even though the guy making that change knew it was outside procedure, against all conventional policy and wisdom, but it was the right thing to do, because he was genuinely trying to save people's lives, and he could explain his process of arriving at that decision, and he got commended for it, even in the public inquiry.
Yeah. And I hope systems have this maturity. And I think that, to be fair, the Swedish system, from what I've encountered so far, has sort of this maturity. Like when there's an injury or there's a sort of, it doesn't look to blame, it looks to sort of like find the reasoning, making sure it doesn't happen. But with that said, I know about, just because I've been to the UK a little bit now and talked to a lot of UK people, the fear of putting the blame on is monumental in the UK.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Monumental.
And that played a part at Grenfell, that absolutely played into Grenfell. That fear. We'll talk about that. So is it with just like kind of working through the kind of first few minutes of what kind of actually happened?
I would love to put a lot of emphasis on the first few minutes on Grenfell, the experience of the fire crews and what happened, and then we'll definitely take the latter part also. But it's more extreme, and there's definitely learning in that for sure. But to me, like the first 30 minutes is really where the meat is, because that's what every fire service in the world has to be able. Sort of every first crew arriving has to handle sort of that scenario.
Spot on. And what I would say is the first guy that turned up, his name is very famous, so anybody can search him. There's a guy called Mike Dowden, and for the record, I thought he did. Incredibly professional guy. His evidence was very professional. He kind of oozed integrity, and what a really difficult job that poor guy faced. And he made some really tough decisions. And the received wisdom is he was criticised. But if anybody reads the report, well, you might argue he wasn't criticised. His lack of training was criticised, and the situation he found himself in through no fault of his own was criticised. Actually, it was a big report. If anybody read the report, he himself wasn't quite the reverse. The chair does say, there was no lack of commitment, no lack of courage. I watched this guy give evidence 3.5 days, and I was impressed by this witness. It was his lack of training that the system put him in this position, not himself. And that's worth bearing in mind. So you're absolutely right. So the call came in, and the caller, essentially, it was a fire in a fridge and on the 4th floor of the tower. The occupier had 2 other people in the flat with him. It was Ramadan at the time, and that was really quite important because there were many people breaking the fast in both living in the tower and around. And the reason why that was important is there were people alert and awake so they could evacuate themselves, but also they could alert others to help them evacuate as well. And actually, it's widely regarded that had it not been Ramadan, the death toll would have been higher at Grenfell. So it was Ramadan, quite a few people were awake breaking the fast. Fire started in the fridge, and it was the inquiry found it was a motor at the back of it. Again, in the UK at the time, fridges only had plastic backings. I think in the States they have metal backings. I don't know about the situation in Sweden, but at that very simple level, white goods, products on sale, that matters. All fires start as small fires, don't they, really? A very small fire at the back of a fridge. If it had been America, there probably wouldn't have been a Grenfell Tower because they had a metal back on the fridge. But at that time, we only had plastic backings on the fridges in this country. I don't know what there's like in your country. So
I don't know if there's a rule, but I would say it's metal, but I couldn't say. It's a good question. Never thought about it.
So products, white goods, because that's where a lot of fire starts, in cookers, ovens, etc., fridges, washing machines, and so on. So a simple, this is the end-to-end bit of Grenfell. It is all connected. Fire started, it was developing slowly. The occupier made his way out of the flat and alerted a couple of neighbours in the vicinity, started to make his way down the stairs, called 999 in this country, the kind of emergency call, got put straight through to the London Fire Brigade. He told them 3 things. It's in flats, the fridge on fire, it's in flat 16, and we're all out. Flat 16 on the 4th floor, and we're all out. And they mobilised in the London Fire Brigade. The predetermined attendance is for 4 appliances, no aerial at that point in time. Again, some of the London Fire Brigade systems weren't very good. So the command and control system didn't have Grenfell Tower as a high-rise building. It came in. So they mobilised 3 appliances instead of the predetermined 4.
Okay.
And one of the control operators thought, Grenfell sounds like a tower. Went and had a quick look on Google Earth, realised it was a tower, and mobilised a 4th appliance. Interestingly, the London Fire Brigade on that night, they were not. So London Fire is one big fire service, of course, one of the biggest in the world. They've got 2 999 control centres. So they've got one control centre that's permanently crewed, but they have a secondary one in case there's a fire at the first or there's a flood. So the backup control. They were in the backup control room that night. The vast majority of the functionality is replicated, so the same command and control system, etc. But they didn't have a screen in the slightly less technology outside of the non-co-immobilizing system, the dispatch system. So they were in the second control that night. The system didn't flag it up as a high-rise building. The control officer realised that and mobilised a fourth pump. And the first two appliances arrived about 4.5 minutes. They were there very, very quickly. So this was now, the fire started between 5 to 1 in the morning of June the 14th. And the crews arrived at 1:05. So they were there around about 9 minutes from the actual first time of the call. Yeah. So the call had been processed, a pump's mobilised, and they'd arrived within 9 to 10 minutes, very, very, very quickly. The officer in charge, Mike Dowden, met the occupier, gave him exactly the same information. So in the UK, the procedure is you set up a bridgehead 2 floors below the fire floor, and your crew runs out a jet up to the fire floor, and then the second jet is run out from the fire floor itself. So you end up with 2 jets. But of course, straight away, because we've run from 2 floors below, we've breached compartmentation of the staircase. We're going through the door. The hose is going through the door. Yeah. So we didn't have smoke curtains in those days in the UK. Most fire services have now got smoke curtains. But again, important tactical change that we in the UK were very, very slow to adopt the smoke curtains. So they got 2 jets laid out, and the first crew then smashed down the door. This is all on a thermal image camera. And then they followed a search pattern that essentially, it was a very warm summer's evening, a balmy evening is the expression used in the UK. Very little wind, very warm, very hot June it was. And they followed a search pattern where they searched the two bedrooms and then started to enter the lounge before realising it was the kitchen that was on fire. And then they turned to start, and they opened the kitchen door, by which stage the fire had really developed now at the back of the fridge. So some of the learning from the UK is the crews did a really good job. But there was a vague briefing to the crews. And so one of the bits of learning I kind of try and take from this is when you send a crew in different countries, even in different fire services in this UK, what's the crew's brief? Do you tell them to tackle the fire? If it's not persons reported or the person's missing, do they go straight to the fire and tackle it, or do they do a search just in case it might be persons missing, or even if it's persons missing? So some fire services believe the first thing you should do and the most important thing to do is tackle the fire, because even if there are persons trapped, tackling the fire still makes it better for them. So straight from the outset, clarity about what your operational principles are, what your operational priorities are. And it was very, very vague. There was no clear briefing, and there was no policy that really said or training that encouraged a clear briefing. And so the crews did this search procedure, but it took them several minutes before they put water on the fire. So from the time they smashed down the door to the time they actually put water on the fire, it was 7 minutes. Yeah. And so it was, by that stage, it was now 01:14 in the morning. So they'd landed at about 01:05, and they actually got water on the fire at 01:14 in the morning. So pretty quick, actually, for a high-rise building fire. By that stage, however, the nature of the construction of the buildings, the fridge was right by the window. The tower had just been refurbished, and it had been clad in this aluminium cladding. And not just clad, what they'd done was a complete refurbishment of the building. So they'd essentially brought the whole building out about 6 or 7 inches. So the cladding was on the outside, but essentially they created a bigger gap that they just filled with insulation. Yeah. And they put all new windows in, and these were aluminium. They were previously aluminium windows, but they were UPVC windows. Yeah. None of them were screwed in. They were all just glued in. And, of course, the glue softens at about 90 degrees or something. So the windows were very quickly falling out.
Yeah.
This cladding was essentially at the same kind of calorific burning rate as petrol.
Yeah.
It's essentially solidified petrol. And the wind right by the fridge, because it was a kitchen, they had an extractor fan. And this extractor fan was basically in a plastic panel. It wasn't even a window. And one of the experts' testimony said, the moment a fire got anywhere near that window, essentially a catastrophe was inevitable, because it wasn't a glass window, it was a plastic window, essentially a plastic fan, and it had no fire resisting properties whatsoever. And once it hit that window, it was then into the cladding, and once it hit the cladding, because there were no cavity barriers, there was no protection, and the materials themselves, really were burned like solid petrol. Essentially, her view was a catastrophe was inevitable. So that it caused the fire. Lars was fridge motor by the window, but it wasn't a window. It was a window with a plastic panel essentially and an extractor fan, and it took several minutes to get in and get water on that. And by the time the filming from outside, mobile telephone cameras and all the rest of it, it was absolutely clear that by the time the London Fire Brigade kind of smashed in the door, and by the time they got into the flat, it had already gone outside by that stage and was starting to move up the flat for the flats on the outside. So it essentially, in the case of Grenfell, even had the crews got to the fire straight away and put water on it, it is highly unlikely it would have prevented the Grenfell Tower fire. That's the kind of collective evidence of all the experts. But what I would say from a learning point of view is that still kind of touch and go. We'll never know, really. And if we're trying to learn, I think there is still a point about being really clear as incident commanders. What's the brief you're giving the crew that's going in? Is it fight the fire? Is it rescue? Is it both? And how do we train people in either of those scenarios? Because what Grenfell demonstrates, that simple thing, clear brief to the crew, matters. It could have been... And that doesn't really come out of the inquiry because it didn't matter on this incident, but it's a minute to either side actually. And were it not for the expert testimony of an engineer, then it might have mattered more even at Grenfell. So just to stress, Lars, I'm certainly not criticising any of the crews. I'm saying for learning, huge amount happened in a relatively short space of time, but from this particular perspective, there was very little to nothing the London Fire Brigade could have done differently at that point. And once it was outside, it was really starting to motor up the face of the building behind and including the cladding. And the cladding was then starting to melt at a ferocious pace. So the fire broke out. Essentially, it was out, and it was out at 0109. It was starting to. It's a fourth floor. It was starting to motor at 0114. You can see the video, it was developing, but it really started to move at about 0114, and it hit the top 12 minutes later at 0126. That's how fast it moved. And it just shot, and it went straight line up all of they were all sixes. So it was flat 16, the next one flat 26, 36. So it was all the sixes on the east side of the building, and it went straight up to the top, and it hit the top in 26 minutes. So at 0126, it hit the top essentially in 12 minutes. That's how fast it moved, which is, by the way, not the fastest on record. Dubai, there have been several other fires that moved faster, believe it or not, with this stuff. And then the other thing I'd say before kind of pausing to see any points on that, Lars, as part of the refurbishment as well, this is a very expensive part of London, probably the most expensive part of London to live. This borough, the borough in which Grenfell Tower was the most deprived borough of a very rich part of London. And so one of the kind of social aspects of some of the background to Grenfell, part of why they did it like this and they cut the corners, it was real. They call it prettification, putting lipstick on a building. Essentially, they hadn't they cut corners to make this look nice, because the underground went straight past it. So there's a real social issue about what they were trying to do with this refurbishment. And there's a strong school of thought that says they were just trying to make it look nice, and they were cutting corners left, right, and centre. And so as part of that, one of the other things that they did to make it look prettier, they put this architectural crown all the way around the top of the building. So this same cladding was just basically, literally a crown. Served no functional purpose at all. It was just prettying the building. And of course, the moment it hit that crown then spread it all the way around the building very, very quickly. And then it started to come down from the top as well as spreading outward like that. That was really what happened with it. So that's the first 25 minutes for them landing. So we hit all 1:30 in the morning now. So by that stage, up until now, the officer in charge had realised this is now starting to motor. He requested additional appliances in very, very quick succession. He asked for another 5 or 6 within about 5 minutes of being there. He asked for another 15 within 10 minutes. And by 1:30, he'd asked for 25 appliances. Now, that's over, in London Fire Brigade, that's about 125 firefighters. That is a phenomenal, we call make-up appliances. In the UK, a make pumps 25 is a very, very rare message to hear on the Instagram.
That's rare for most fire services. Most fire services can't even make pump 25 because
absolutely. Well, I do session in fire brigades, and in London Fire Brigade they actually made pumps 40 later on. The 25th pump was there in about 25 minutes,
which is just bonkers.
If that happened in another part of the country, I was in one of the fire service, a more rural fire service. I said, how long would it take your 25th pump to get there? And one of the guys says, we'll be using a calendar, not a stopwatch, put it that way.
So if you go to the north of Sweden, you would go like second pumper would be 2 hours away. But so it's a different, and that context, of course, is important too. But let's go back to that, because it is, again, the first 30 minutes I think is the most crucial. First off, it's the most crucial one. Like that's where you have the most impact. Like after that, you're sort of playing catch up if it's a bad accident, and so on. But it's also again that every even if you're in a rural fire department, respond to a flat fire on the 4th floor, which could be like a rural, it could be a sort of that height. Is the initial response could look exactly the same. So the procedures are a lot of times very broad and should be broad. And like you said, when you look at an incident, and I typically look at incidents in the way that, so this was happened, and that's great to know what happened, but then you start to play what if, this what if, because you're benchmarking your expected behaviors, what you train your firefighters to be. If it were like this, if there was a person lying in front of the front door, what would you expect the firefighters to do? If the fire was straight to the left, what would happen? If the fire did this, what would happen? So you're benchmarking your procedures on a real incident to see both at the actual real incident, but also all these what ifs. But so you have this. They respond. They set up their sort of bridgehead. Their procedure was you have to bring a jet with you. They bring a jet and they know it's a fire. They breach the compartmentation. They arrive to the fire because there was, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was little or no actual smoke outside of the apartment, right?
Almost none. You could just see flames flickering around that fan. That's really about it. There was very little smoke. And in the chairman's report, he said when Mike Dowden arrived, it looked like he was dealing with a fairly innocuous fire on a lower floor of a flat. A very, very typical and seemingly not especially serious incident. He had no reason to expect this to change like that, to become a near catastrophe within minutes. And we'll get into the covering jet later, like they try to suppress it from outside. Like, were their sort of procedures, trainings, whatever, at sort of deploying covering jets on the outside exterior streams on the facade? Were there any procedures sort of
when that should be in play?
No. So it's very interesting. So that external jet gets quite a lot of discussion in the fire service, and it did in the inquiry. So in the UK, we had an incident probably 30, maybe even 40 years ago now, where a firefighter was killed in a terrible, tragic incident, and steam burns became a thing.
Yeah.
And there have been several incidents in the UK where it was believed that playing a jet when people are still inside searching, when crews are still inside searching, you can potentially drive the fire towards them inadvertently. And there's been several incidents where that's happened, where crews on the front of a building have essentially driven the fire to the back, and crews at the back we've had casualties. And in fact, a couple of deaths in that cases. So culturally, in the UK, there's a reticence to put water in from the outside if crews are on the inside of a building. And that absolutely happened at Grenfell. Yeah. Essentially, they were playing the jet below the window on fire. They weren't really trying to put the fire out. And in fact, on some of the video footage, there's members of the public thinking they're not doing it. They're not putting. And there's one woman shouts, "Put the effing fire out! Put the effing water in the fire!" Screaming at the crews. And you can see they're essentially just it's more of a cooling jet of the window than a serious attempt to put the fire out. And that is very much a UK cultural thing. And I do think there is a real issue. Some of the research done at UL in America, essentially, I think we've all come round to the idea we should start pussyfooting around to the extent for Christ's sake, get some bloody wet stuff on the orange stuff, and let's start there, shall we? That kind of basic. Get some water. We can do a calculation and find we can, but what we need is a load of bloody wet stuff on that big orange stuff, and let's see how we go while we have
it's a good start. It's a good start.
Well, there's not much. You can't go far wrong, except in the UK. There has been the belief that you can go far wrong. You could scald crews, you could burn crews, etc. And I think there is a need for a deeper think about that in the UK tactically. But you're absolutely right. In Grenfell, they did attempt that for a short period of time. But the truth is, even had they been successful, so I need to be clear on this point, because it was rain screen cladding. All they were doing was deal with the plastic of the window that had, essentially, the plastic around the extractor fan. It wasn't actually even the window. Because the cladding was rain screen cladding. When the water hit it, all it did was run off because it was rain screen cladding. The fire was motoring behind the insulation behind the cladding and essentially burning outwards, so to speak. So as it goes, it wouldn't have made a particular difference at Grenfell had they seriously put some water to try and tackle the fire. But in any event, there is still a cultural issue, I think, for all of us learning, from a fire nerd point of view, about this reticence to put water on fires anymore. We have got a bit dancing around. I
think there's definitely some aspects of that, and the experience of having water shoot through the window and hurting and possibly kill firefighters is prevalent in every country. So it doesn't come from nowhere. I mean, I think it's a mixture of both actually being the case, but also just mixing it up with wind-driven fires and flashovers and backdrafts and like this. The people don't really know what it is, so you latch on to something.
It's funny you say that, Lars, because when I mentioned that we brought all the cold cutting equipment into Greater Manchester, I anticipated, well, what happens? It puts the fire out, doesn't it? Well, suppress it back and convert it instantly to steam, whatever the expansion ratio to steam, etc. So that's why it has such a dramatic cooling effect. It drops the temperature like a stone because it's essentially a steam explosion. I know that's not a technical term, but essentially that's what it is,
Yeah.
isn't it, really? So we thought, well, crikey, what happens to people who would be on the inside of that building? So we did some proper research. We commissioned the insurance industry, the fire protection association industry, and we also brought in some proper sort of medical specialists, lung specialists, for smoke burns, heat burns, steam burns, etc. So we had a proper piece of research done about steam and steam burns and steam production and what it means. So I think Grady mentioned I've made that available. And it was the first time I'm aware that, and essentially, it's like a kettle, isn't it? If a kettle's boiling and you put your hand over the spout of a kettle, it's going to kind of burn, isn't it? Yeah. If you hold it up there, it'll get a bit warm. If you hold it over here, you'll hardly feel the stir, because steam has got very, very little kinetic energy, so it hardly moves. There's very little pressure behind it, and so the conclusion was to really be injured, you'd have to be very, 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 very close indeed to the fire. And actually, if you were, the steam would probably be your least of your problems. There is another issue about firefighters and PPE, etc. So it does need a bit more research. But I think the conclusion we came to is there absolutely is a risk, probably overstated, actually, but equally under-researched as well.
I'm sure, I agree. I think that it needs more research. I think, I would say it is an issue, but you have to put that into perspective, all the gains you can have by applying water, for instance, and so on. And you go like, well, if the option is to let it burn, that is not an option. Like what if the option is to do this? So, and we can definitely get back to that, but I want to get to Grenfell, because it is these topics of sort of this what ifs, and you go like, well, the crews arrive, you arrive to a fire, first off, you take your jet with you, compromise the staircase, which in this case it wasn't an issue at start, right? Yeah. Because the lobby, the hallway outside of the apartment, that was smoke free too, right? Yeah. When they arrived.
Yeah. So so as the fire started moving up the building, it was because, remember I said they brought the whole building out about 6 inches, and you'd put the windows on the external face, which is now a kind of flush face. Yeah. But behind the windows, you've now got this gap. So the old building was here, the new fascia is here, and you've got this gap. They put about 4 inches of cladding, a cavity, and then the ACM cladding, the aluminium cladding and cavity. And all that they've done at each level with the windows, they then put a window in on the outside. They basically just put a plastic UPVC window sill to cover the gap between the old building and the new window. So you've got a gap like that and a window sill just going across it like that. That was plastic. So they went. It is essentially, you created one huge chimney. So the fire's going up and it's going straight into the flats, one by one. It's then burning from the inside, starts to set fire to the flat windows and all the rest of it. The windows are only glued in, so they start falling out and falling in. And so very quickly, all the way up to the top, 126 at the top, all the people in flat sixes, people then started evacuating. And by this stage, the staircase remained clear. And this is where self-closing doors become really important, isn't it? So 2/3 of the self-closing devices in Grenfell were either missing completely or faulty. And so as people were now starting to leave their flats, they were leaving the doors open behind them, and of course penetrating the flats. They've left the door open, so all the other 5 flats on the same floor level. But remember, most of these people are not involved, so it's only going up the east side. If you're on one of the other sides, you're thinking, what's all that noise? And there wasn't a great deal of noise at this stage, because we're still at 1:30 in the morning. There's only 5 fire engines there, so there's very little noise. You're sat there oblivious, breaking the fast, or even in bed or whatever. And 5 flats, all the flat sixes, the ones involved, people who the fire breaks through, so they're evacuating. They go into the stairs and start making their way down the stairs. Some of the staircase doors don't shut, but most of the flat doors don't shut. So they've just left the flat burning. with an open door, and not knowing anything else.
Yeah, no.
And there are 5 flats on the same landing who are completely oblivious in most cases to the fact there's even a fire occurring by this stage, and it's already hit the top.
Yeah. Is there like a building alarm system where you can?
No, each flat had its own independent alarm. So there were smoke detectors in each flat, but they're just alerted in the flat. There was no common alarm system. There was no common evacuation system. Yeah. So by 1:30, people are now starting to pile out of the building from various levels. And as they're coming down, some of them are knocking on neighbours' doors saying, get out, there's a fire. People are now starting to evacuate at the bottom. They're now starting to ring people, the neighbours, on mobile telephones. They're now starting to try and shout up. So by 1:30, it is now starting to create noise and activity, and people are starting to be alerted. So many people are smelling smoke, and this is now when they start ringing the London Fire Brigade 999 control centre. Yeah. So about 1:35, 1:40, the calls, the 999 calls, really start to accelerate very, very rapidly, to the extent that within about 10 minutes of all this happening, so between about 1:40 and 1:50, the London Fire Brigade gets so many calls, essentially it just collapses. Yeah. So all the calls then start to tip over. And the 999 calls for Grenfell were taken as far away as Manchester, Essex, Kent, Surrey, and there were 5 other fire and rescue services actually started taking 999 calls for Grenfell Tower. And Manchester about 200 miles away from London, because the fact that there were so many 999 calls, and you would have the same. Everybody's got a mobile telephone at a mile. Yeah. So the control room just went and jammed up solid. People are now literally piling out of the building from about 1:30 onwards. Yeah. And the fire is now starting to spread rapidly around the top of the building, and then so it's gone straight up the 6s, but it's now starting to spread in a kind of towards the kind of north side of the building. So in a kind of a northeast direction. It's moving around the building in that northeasterly direction. And at this stage, Mike Dowden he's requested 25 appliances, 2 aerial appliances, the turntable and hydraulic platforms, and what they call in London emergency rescue appliances. So these are appliances with extended duration breathing apparatus. Yeah. Have you got that in Sweden? Yeah. So the only fire service in this country, they call it EDBA, extended duration breathing apparatus. Because of the underground, London is the only brigade in this country that's really got any extensive amount of EDBA, and they carried on these emergency rescue units. So 2 of them arrived, one arrived quite quickly at about 1:35 or something like that. So from 1:35 onwards, appliances and officers start to arrive in very, very quick succession. But at the same time, the fire and that is also a problem in a way. I know it sounds like a nice problem to have in one sense, but when lots of appliances and officers arrive together, we find many of the trends in this country where it's all gone wrong is when too many, they can struggle with not enough resources. When they all land together, everybody's trying to tell each other what's going on, and all the handing over command, it just becomes chaos. And you can have a too quick succession of command. They've spent so much time telling each other what they told the last one, that the various handovers, that the fire, it's taken 20 minutes. You've lost the fire in that 20 minutes, just trying to hand over command. And that's pretty much what happened at Grenfell as well.
Yeah, I want to get to when it started to snowball, but I'd still want to go back again, because the first crew responding to the apartment, sort of the first appliances, there was early on, again, the covering jet also. But what more happened early on besides the crew going to the fire apartment and sort of the covering jet, or at least some wetting of the facade? What more happened early on?
So essentially, they realised, the officer in charge and some of the other officers realised the fire was starting to break in at other levels. A couple of the firefighters essentially wandered up the building with radios that didn't work very well, by the way.
Yeah.
And this was one of the criticisms that the command and control of some of the crew, well, to be fair, the self-discipline of some of the crew, they were curious. So essentially, they wandered up the building.
They talked to some of the people coming down, right? If I recall.
Yeah, they did, but they were under no control, and the radios weren't working. And essentially, that was one of the criticisms of the chair of the inquiry, actually, that these firefighters just decided out of curiosity to go and have a look.
Yeah.
Just to go and have a wander up the building. And they started to see people coming down now. They started to see them covered in smoke. And they tried to call on the radio, the officer in charge. Yeah. But, of course, one of the problems we've got in high-rise buildings here, you'll have the same again, is the suppressed radio signals. So the radios weren't working very well. But they were starting to realise this isn't behaving normally. And so as other crews arrived, within sort of 20 minutes or so, the officer in charge, Mike Dowden, he started to commit crews to the next levels up. Yeah. So the third crew that came along, they went to the fire was on the 4th floor. Yeah. They started to tackle the fire on the 5th floor, and another crew was starting to tackle the fire on the 6th floor. So his strategy, this is one of the kind of criticisms, he was still thinking a firefighting strategy. Yeah. So on the outside of the building, he could see the fire. It's incredibly fast. It's gone to the top. It's hit the top by 0126. His crew went in at 0107 and he saw them go in. And in the space of about 10, 15 minutes, several other appliances and other officers arrived. And he's positioned himself on the southeast corner and he has literally watched this fire just motor away from him. And he's tried to commit crews kind of almost on this sort of concertina, just go one on top of the other, trying to chase the fire. But again, to be fair, Lars, the guy wasn't really well trained. With a very vague, what was he actually trying to achieve? They weren't taking any firefighting equipment with them. They weren't taking any holes in them. They were going to the fire was spreading, so he was committing more crews. But he wasn't really clear what he was committing them to do. So he would send them into the bridgehead, and the guy at the bridgehead was sort of saying, well, what do I do with you? I've only got a limited amount of holes here. Yeah. Well, just go up and see what's going on. So essentially, they were mobilising them for a kind of reconnoitre process, really, and to try and figure out what was going on without any clear strategy in mind, what they were expecting them to do. Because by now, people were starting to really kind of come out the building at the bottom residence. Yeah.
And then, so sort of the crew on site started realizing this is not just a single residential fire. This is spreading to multiple locations. That's where sort of it snowballs, of course, into where I think the most sort of interesting lessons are maybe on a sort of a strategy, tactical level, and like realizing that this is not something you firefight your way out. You need to evacuate and assist evacuation, protect egress, and so on. Now there are of course also on top of that these hundreds of stories of firefighters doing fantastic things on an individual level, self-organizing, doing things, carrying people down multiple flats, with no backup, anything. These is heroic stories about what happened on that level. And of course, lessons to be learned from that too. But they're very hard to operationalize because we, especially in Europe, America is sort of the same, but a little bit less. We have this mentality that firefighters shouldn't die and we should really jeopardize firefighters for, in extreme cases, like if it is not an obvious rescue, you shouldn't sort of jeopardize firefighters. So it's very hard to operationalize sort of heroic deeds. Yeah. Like, okay, now it's a time to switch to decentralized anarchy strategy. Everybody do what they feel like. But it was a lot of that going on at Grenfell, from what I understand.
Yeah. So there's a fine line, isn't there, between the need for people to use their initiative and recognise the kind of dynamic situation that they're in, and and follow procedures. So there's quite a lot we know about a fire and how it behaves and how you might put it out. And there's quite a lot that's similar for most incidents from that point of view. How exactly this fire is behaving and what exactly you need to do for this fire is actually very difficult to proceduralise, isn't it? Because they are all genuinely unique. There is no other combination of this room, these contents, this building, this time of day, this wind speed. Genuinely, each fire is truly unique, although there are quite a lot of features about it that are consistent for them all. So one of the questions was, how do people learn to use their initiative and improvise? And where's the line between procedures, following a command and control structure, and doing your own thing? Improvisation, in other words, or freelancing. And there isn't really an easy answer to that question. It's not written down anywhere. In fact, I could only find the word initiative, use your initiative, that expression. I can only find it written down in one piece of guidance in the UK, and that guidance dates back to the old Manual of Firemanship from about 1970 something. Actually, the proposition that a firefighter needs to be able to use their initiative is literally not written down anywhere that we could find in the whole of this inquiry. And why is that important? Because you're absolutely right, Lars. Once you get in, you're on your own, aren't you? Essentially, you've got to be trusted to apply your own judgment and common sense in this situation. And therefore, being a team leader in breathing apparatus matters. And so how you select team leaders, how you train team leaders, how you think about the question of leadership inside a fast-moving situation where people are going to have to use their initiative, I think what Grenfell tells us requires some more thought. Because in the UK, there is very little of that. There's very little of team building development, this recognition that when you go inside, even an operational firefighter, training about leadership or command or that kind of leading people in a stressful situation only kicks in at officer level, and even then it's graduated. So the investment in that kind of training for the more junior officers isn't as significant as it is for the more senior officers. And yet the reality is reverse of that, isn't it? That ability to make fast decisions in a dynamic situation, that is needed most at the most junior level, because they're the ones that are going in when the smelly stuff's hitting the fan, aren't they, really? So we have actually got a challenge in this country, and I think it's probably true around the world. So at Grenfell, absolutely, people were improvising and in many cases being very brave. But your point, people don't say, right, now I'm going to be heroic and now I'm going to stop being heroic. They're just in a situation. It's only when we look at it afterwards that we can see it as a brave, a heroic thing to do. At the time, they were just doing what they thought they needed to, or they could get away with, or required. They were just acting, weren't they? There was no judgment being applied about bravery or otherwise. They were just doing at the time. So where does that leave? Well, I suppose where does that leave us from a point of view of learning? I think where it leaves us is, I think we do need to come back into thinking again that there is a reality, in particular for fire, I would say, more than any other emergencies that fire officers and operational commanders face. Because if you choose to do something, that will affect the course of events to do with a fire. Equally, if you choose not to do something, that will have an effect on the course of this fire. Literally, you can't stand, there's no option of standing in the middle. And even if you stand in the middle, while you're messing around deciding, that has mattered in terms of the course of the fire, because it's fast moving, it's changing, it's happening. In the UK, we've been incredibly successful at reducing the incidence of fire, smoke alarms and all the rest of it. So the actual operational experience of many people is a heck of a lot lower than it used to be in years gone by. And that's not sort of swinging lambs. That's a fact of life. It's true in most parts of the world. we've also, because of various health and safety reasons, I think moderated our training to make it safer, less rigorous, less arduous. And I think that's true of most parts of the Western world as well. Whereas in a real fire, the reverse has happened. They've got hotter, they burn faster, and they're more complex than they've ever been. You might have lithium in the middle of them now, as well as kind of cladding and all the rest of it. So we've gone in different directions, haven't we? Our training's got softer, easier, less rigorous, and I suppose safer in some senses. Fires have got hotter, more dangerous, but there's less of them, so we've not really noticed the kind of crossover. And I think Grenfell pulls that out, that the crews, there was no real clear, what were they trying to do? Were they trying to tackle the fire, or were they trying to rescue people? I don't think you'll find any evidence that there were any of them were clear what they were trying to do. They were just reacting, to be honest with you, Lars. And I think the final thing I'd also say, I think we've forgotten about is some of the neuroscience and neurobiology about decision making during crisis. So you've probably come across the Gary Klein stuff, I guess, the recognition prime decision making. So there's all that stuff, but as well as that, there's also a lot of stuff about how the brain works and situational awareness. And I show a couple of kind of entertainment things. Do you remember the movie Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter? So in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf looks about 20 feet tall, doesn't he? While Frodo looks about 6 feet tall. And it's a trick. They've used the camera trick, haven't they? So your brain thinks in 3D. So you can trick your brain by that camera trick. Street artists use it as well, don't they? So they use perspective to trick you into thinking there's a hole in the ground when it's a kind of So the art and media use the functioning of the brain to think in 3D to trick your brain for entertainment or other purposes. But the fact is, your brain can easily be tricked. And under stress, your brain isn't actually functioning as well as it would do not under stress. So as well as you doing the RPD stuff and you're looking for cues, CUES, what's going on? Oh, I know this is a fire. Then sometimes what you think you're seeing isn't in fact what you are seeing. And to the point that one of the officers at Grenfell was absolutely convinced he was seeing fires on balconies. He wasn't telling lies. He was absolutely believed. His background was in a part of the country where he'd done a lot of high-rise firefighting, but the majority of the buildings had balconies. So he was very familiar with fires on balconies, and his view, fire was spreading so quickly, it had to be balconies. Black sky, very flat building, vision poor, under stress. He was absolutely convinced he was looking at balconies. Several of the other officers were convinced it was pigeon netting. Again, in London, they have a problem with pigeons on buildings. So basically, many buildings are covered in pigeon netting, which is like a plastic sort of netting thing. And very often, they'll have a flash fire, and it looks like the whole building's on fire because this netting is flashing. There were at least 20 people in their statements thought it was pigeon netting before they got there. So So these poor guys trying to make command decisions on the ground, it's changed. It's easy for us to say that, but sometimes even what they think they're seeing in that moment, we can see the videos afterwards, but they didn't have the luxury of that, did they? The brain can be tricking them on what they think they're seeing, may well be not the seeing. And the second bit is because of the kind of Gary Klein stuff. They're already preconditioned. If they haven't had high quality training, if they've not had a lot of rigorous training about keeping calm, keeping composed, I know my tactics, you need to put into muscle memory fire science, fire tactics. All this stuff needs to be back in your muscle memory, doesn't it? Not because at the time when you need to stitch it all together into a plan. Do I evacuate? Do I fight the fire? The processing of what it is it's going to be has to be so quick that if it's not embedded in your muscle memory, you haven't got time to read a book about it.
No, yeah, absolutely true, and I think that's one of the lessons when I became an officer that I just started to realize how poor performance my brain was working at. It was very frustrating, where my expectation on myself did not match at all the outcome. So I realized that for myself, of course, especially when I was an officer. I started using body cams for myself, which was allowed, but it was not encouraged, sort of, because there was all this fear of everything from, who is this public information and so on. But but anyway, so I definitely started experiencing that myself, this lack of it. And ever since I've been struggling, and I don't think there's a solution on this, to find the adequate mix of creating robots and creating thinking firefighters, because there's this easy answer to say, oh, we don't want robots, we want thinking firefighters, but thinking firefighters are slow. That's just good, because if you, to actually think, it's like system 1, system 2. System 2 is very slow, and it's like it's you don't have time to think. You have time to think on very specific few things that are crucial that you need to think about. Everything else has to basically be automized. Yeah. It has to be like, oh, yeah, I see this. I recognize the fire out of the window here. It's probably good for a jet. Go like it just fast. Do this, and because I'm starting to think about, okay, where's this going, and so on. I have to sort of start processing, and finding that balance between finding sort of what should I sort of drill into sort of muscle memory, system 1, or what do I need to sort of just tabletop discussions, think about it, flip it and turn it, and start to do this dynamic process. That was a very hard one. And it still is, because there's no easy answer, because if you have a part-time firefighter, you have to automate more. You have to get more of a robot, because there's not enough time. And if there's a full-time dedicated Firenerd, you have a lot of time to sort of analyze, because you have a deeper understanding, which creates new sets of problems because you don't have time to analyze everything. But how do you think about this sort of, like you say, how do we create this muscle memory, even decide what to put in muscle memory, and what to sort of create this dynamic framework of there has to be a thinking officer, a thinking firefighter.
Well, I agree with all your observations about that, about how hard it is, Lars. So I think it's a multifactorial approach. So, and actually, I think it does differ for the command aspect to the operational aspect. I think there's quite a lot of tactical muscle memory, container training, hot fire training. So there's a lot of good stuff that can be put in there, and you can build a lot of good awareness. But there is still quite a lot of training at the operational tactical level. The command bit, again, in the UK, I think we've all got a bit fixated with virtual reality, or these kind of the various packages that are all very whizzy. But it's almost like gaming, isn't it? And so we're really fixed in the UK on assessing people. And so to assess somebody, you almost have a marking sheet. And has
to be a procedure and a...
Yeah. So we want to make sure everybody's competent for insurance and other reasons. Yeah. So we have this whole series of competencies, and then people have to be reassessed, every 3 years, or revalidated as competent every 3 years. So what that looks like in practical reality is you'll go to a training centre, and they'll have some kind of virtual reality scenario in these several rooms, a train crash, a plane crash, or whatever, and somebody will be assessing you. Did you do your situational awareness? And we'll all have an acronym, did they remember methane, what methane stood for? Have this sectorised, so that we've got into a situation of tick boxing, because we have become a bit fixated on this thing called the assessment of competence. And it doesn't in any way prepare people for the real world. But legally it has to be addressed. So what you then have to do, and actually one of my recommendations to the chairman of the inquiry, is that you really do need a kind of good fire academy, some kind of training institution. And in a way, what we're talking about now, what you need is unpicking incidents like Grenfell. You need people to engage with what happened and to dip, as you said, look at it, rip it apart. Well, what would you have done that? What if?
Yeah.
There's not enough of that what if kind of scenario planning or scenario thinking or unpicking or getting to a level of detail. We're fixed with trying to give very superficial acronyms. So the idea, you know, this kind of your tick, 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 tick. You rock up, do a dynamic risk assessment, formulate a tactical plan, collect your situational awareness, do a dynamic risk assessment, do an automatic risk assessment, implement your plan, think about your plan if it's going wrong. You know, we constantly present this idea of a very linear, hierarchical, quite straightforward process, and it's nothing like that at all, is it? Yeah. It's pandemonium.
It's a mess.
And so what you need to allow people to experiment with where their boundaries are. You need to allow them to figure out what pushes my buttons, because I think there's a thing called command presence. So when somebody rocks up, the job of the commander, in the first instance, is to calm everybody down, and as much as anything else, calm themselves down to get system 2. You're absolutely right, because you're automatically going to go to system 1, aren't you? You can't really stop yourself. You can slow that process down by having been trained hard a lot, but you're never going to quite stop yourself. But the act of you calming everybody else down, asserting a bit of authority, a presence over this incident, is then what gives you a chance to say, right, on my earlier point, let's start with swacking some wet stuff on the orange stuff. At the very least, it gives me a time to think about plan A. That isn't even plan A. That's holding things, and at the very least, almost not doing any harm before we start to do some good, really. Let's start there, because we're going to need some water to do that. So there's quite a lot you can do anyway to get them. And I think once you start getting into that, you then train people. These are not tactical plans, to an extent. These are tools of the game that you can implement to buy yourself the time to allow you to get the system 2 bit of your brain engaged, because that's what you're going to need for this complex incident. But you've got to train people through that really difficult phase to get there. And if you're spending all your time tick box assessing them against virtual reality simulators, you've got a problem. So I think how do we do it, Lars? I think we need harder, more serious, pressurized training, but at one and the same time, more case study type of evaluative, analytical, proper study. We've got Sandhurst, one of the oldest military colleges in the UK, and they will still unpick the Battle of Waterloo or the Battle of Mafeking. And what they'll now start looking tragically at what's going on in Ukraine or Gaza. So, and in a way, I'll almost guarantee, I'm not an expert in this field, of course, but my strongest guess is the tactics of warfare will not have changed a great deal. The apparatus used to implement those tactics, drones and all the rest of it, may well have changed, and some of the tactics might have changed. But the academies like Sandhurst will have unpicked history and then looked at a modern one in the context of that history. If you were to ask most fire officers in this country about the major fires that we've had over the last 40 years, I doubt any of them could seriously tell you what happened at any of those incidents, really, because there is no vehicle that we would go back and unpick some of them and say, is it still relevant today? What do we learn then? And are we still repeating the same mistakes? Or are we doing something new?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely true. And I think that, but it goes back to what I said in the start about structures. In that case, I think that the way that the incidents are presented doesn't provide the officers or whatever who's learning can't see the real benefit. If you present it as, they have buckets of, horses and buckets, therefore I can't learn anything. So I think it's about how you present that case. And that's probably hard and so on. But it definitely is that we don't do that. But I want to tie into the one you talked about before about freelancing.
Yeah.
So I went to the UK a couple of months ago and did some lectures, and I have a very decentralized way. I've developed a very decentralized way of command. I want to push down as much authority as I can to firefighters and so on, because I just don't think it works to have centralized command. There's too much. It's too slow. It's too much. It's too many errors. It sounds good in theory to have this unified command who knows everything and directs everything.
It's a sort of mission command model, isn't it, of the military? You set the objectives and let them get on with it.
Yeah. So first, before I even went to the UK, and of course, the nerds have tried to prepare me to sort of what to expect, and of course, I've since UK is English, I've looked at the nog and everything like that. But doesn't it give you an actual image of what people actually do or the culture and so on? So I ask questions at forums to get the sort of the opinions of non-nerds and so on. And I remember to start talking about the BA entry procedure and the entry control operator. And sort of asked it like a hypothetical question, like say you arrive to a fire, entry control officer puts a board in place, and fire team goes inside. And let's say one of the firefighters get injured. And would it be okay for the entry control officer to help to drag the firefighter out? And the answer was it's just massive wall of never ever, you would never ever do that. Like the entry control operator is solely for the purpose of maintaining the board communication. And I was going like, so it is literally the fact that it's more important to monitor the air of the injured firefighter who needs to be dragged out than to actually drag them out. And it wasn't even like a discussion. It wasn't it was this wall of never ever, that's stupid, don't even think about it. It was this massive. And I was going like, holy crap. And the other one was I was because I didn't know this. I was talking about the incident command, arriving at an incident, and everything we do before committing troops. What we streams on the outside, could be Cobra, whatever, like all this, which fire service typically don't train on, because you train from the door in. You train on the BA attack. And I was talking about that, and my assumption was when I got in that firefighters could get on air whenever they choose, because I was talking like you should have someone doing an exterior attack, and if they got to go through a window, they put air in because they would protect themselves. And you saw these crickets go, like people going like, and I didn't really understand it, because afterwards they're like, we can't go on air if we, we have to go to the entry control operator even if we're on the outside. Like you have to, so you have to set up this entire process before we can even start on the outside.
Yeah.
But because to me it rolled back to is like, well, you send people inside, and then they have their domain which they can operate sort of freely inside. They can do left-hand search, put water and everything, because you can't physically be in there and point. But as soon as they go outside of the building, now they have no autonomy whatsoever. They are children that you need to put, you need to hold their hands. You can't go on air if you like. You can't put a water in through a window. You can't do anything. The officer has to do everything. And I went to like, don't you see like this massive conflict between of this what's called like, you can't even go on air, but they can go into a burning building and do lots of things. Like that doesn't compute to me in levels of what kind of risks do we allow people to do. But I want you to expand on this, like this, because you talked about procedures and this assessment. I would say this system, at least from my perspective, that the UK has created this. I call the UK the World Championship of procedures, like the World Championship of written things down, and the unintended consequences of that is basically beating down initiative. Positive freelancing, not anarchy. That's something else. Like positive, taking the initiative, allowing people to act like on the outside and to do various things. Where did that come from? And how, if you agree, how do you think that you should be able to start unwind this overprotective stance on sort of the individual firefighter safety?
Yeah, it is a really very interesting observations, Lars. I can recognise absolutely. So, was it Rommel in the Second World War said the British write the best procedures in the world? Thank God they never follow them. I'm sure it was Rommel. You're absolutely right. Yeah. The UK, and I think to an extent, culturally, it's definitely a UK thing. I think culturally, it's quite an American thing as well. The NFPA, and it actually goes wider than the fire service. It's a fixer. So outside of my fire life, I'm the chairman of a hospital. Yeah. They call it the trust here. So I'm in charge of a hospital, and our NHS is unbelievably bureaucratised. There was a guy did a study of NASA in America after the Challenger blew up several years ago, and essentially NASA had forgotten that its mission was to put people in space, and he said it had become, and he called it a self-licking ice cream cone. That was the expression of the bureaucracy, which I think is a great expression, isn't it? Yeah. And so in the UK, there were 2 or 3 sort of fixations that feed this. So the first one is, and it's grown, is that somebody is accountable. It's somebody's fault when something goes wrong, and our legal system encourages that challenge of litigation, finding out. To the extent that in this country, when I was the chief of Manchester, my predecessor faced a trial by jury, and he risked life in prison. So it was what called gross negligent manslaughter. So a firefighter was tragically killed trying to undertake a water rescue. This guy drowned. And we have the overarching body is called the Health and Safety Executive in this country. So it's the whole arching safety system. And this officer was prosecuted essentially for a charge of what they call gross negligent manslaughter. Yeah. And if found guilty, it was up to life imprisonment. Yeah. That was the fire chief. My predecessor in Manchester. The same happened to a chief constable. And even as we speak today, we had a terrible situation of a nurse that murdered a load of babies, a lady called Lucy Letby, just within the last couple of years. And the executives in charge of that hospital, they are now looking at facing gross negligent manslaughter charges. Yeah. So culturally, the pursuit of people when a decision goes wrong is true. This isn't perception. It absolutely happens. So it makes those people want to feel protected at the top. Yeah. The way they get that protection, most of the courts look at, if it's written down, if there's a procedure for it, then all the person has to do is follow the procedure. So we therefore are procedure on top of procedure on top of procedure. And if you looked at our national operational guidance, it is impressively extensive, isn't it? Absolutely.
It's
so extensive.
Ridiculously.
You simply, if you try to print out our national operational guidance, you'd fill a room twice the size of this study I'm in now. It's literally impossible to print out. Yet, if you go to something like Southern Ireland, all of their operational procedures fit in 2 lever arch files. Their equivalent fits in 2 lever arch files. It's a country. It's the same. I mean, it's a smaller country, but it's still a country. And I think it just illustrates the level of bureaucratization. But it's a belief that the bureaucracy, the procedures protect you when you are inevitably challenged. And if you take those firefighters who were stood on the outside, the moment one of them got injured, stood on the outside, it wouldn't be the case where they said, well, you know, stuff happens, it's part of the risk that you take. Absolutely, they would 100% sue their employer, the local fire service, and would almost certainly win and get a payout to hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds. And that's if they survived, by the way. If they tragically perished, the chief fighter will then risk facing a charge of manslaughter and potentially life imprisonment. That's how big a deal the bureaucracy is. So in that setting, Lars, if you were the chief, would you take the risk? So the answer is you bureaucratise absolutely everything. So I think you're absolutely right to recognise the phenomenon, and the cultural legacy of it is part fire, but part wider than fire anyway. And it's one of the reasons as a country why our productivity is stifled. There are so many rules and regulations. Even, it's well known the UK is struggling with just as a country nationally to get productivity up, because we're stifled by bureaucracy, whether it's planning, whether it's laws, whether it's fire law. Every bit of our society is fixated on proceduralisation and bureaucratisation. And it feels to most people madness. Just living life is a lot of form filling in the UK. It's not just fire service, but it does pervade itself into the fire service as well. And so you then say, how do you get out of that, Lars? With great difficulty. With great difficulty. I think the only answer is you're not going to unwind it. There's nobody going to come along and say, get rid of all these procedures because they're not needed anymore. Because they still are, the laws are still there. I think the only way, it was one of the reasons why, again, I recommended a kind of training academy. I think you have to train people to understand that this is the environment in which they're operating, and there are ways you then write almost a procedure for this. We tried it's called operational discretion. So if you take that scenario, you then have a procedure that says where, in the judgment of the officer in charge, the weather conditions, the fire conditions, etc., make it acceptable for people to choose for themselves whether to go under air or not, then they can make that decision. But in law, that would have to be consulted with the trade unions, the employee representatives, the staff themselves. There would legally have to be a consultation process, and it would require everybody to agree that that was a sensible thing to do. Realistically, they'd all have to agree. Otherwise, if you put that procedure in without agreement and anything happened, you would put yourself in a very risky position. And bringing all this right back to Grenfell, we've got exactly that situation now. So several fire and rescue services are putting a policy that says if you've got a fire in a high-rise building and you are checking the stairs are free from smoke, you can take smoke curtains with you, but actually you don't need to go under air in breathing apparatus if you're just kind of checking the staircase in clean air. That has been seriously objected to by the trade union in this country, and actually rejected by the trade union. They've even written to the Health and Safety Executive to ask the Health and Safety Executive to intervene to prevent fire brigades having that policy. This is even after Grenfell, because their belief is that that puts firefighters at an unnecessary risk, that they might inadvertently go above the fire floor, even though it's a 2-hour protected staircase in the building whatsoever, and even though they'll have breathing apparatus on, and even though they're perfectly capable of exercising their own judgment, despite all of those, the kind of a trade union view has been that's not acceptable. They simply shouldn't go above the fire floor. That's it. It's black and white. So it's a very deep, culturally ingrained issue, Lars.
Yeah, that's sad and unfortunate because it's sort of, because anyone can see that's a train going in one direction. Meaning, in the end, there won't be any firefighters because the safer thing is to never leave the fire station. So if every decision is taken as, oh, what's the safest option, then it reverts back to we don't need a fire service because we can't really do anything. So it is a balance between, first off, balance between different risks. Like if you don't take some risk at training, you take bigger risks during actual firefighting. So in some sense, there's a risk trade-off between two types of risk, but it's also, of course, a trade-off between being effective and what kind of risk we take. There has to be a trade-off here. Like, again, if we're not worried about effect, we can just stay at the fire station. That is the safest option. Because if we don't value any effect, and then you go like, well, how much risk you take? But I want your take on this, because I thought I would like to say I've thought a lot about this, but we have the same tendencies in Sweden, the same problems, of course. Like if I take an example, when I stopped full time and I became a part-time firefighter, I was a part-time fire officer, and then I respond in a small fire truck as just a personal vehicle. And it's not a personal vehicle. You have a fire truck with you at home. It's just but it's a small. It's a
rapid response vehicle.
Rapid response vehicle. And I go, and then I go straight to the fire, and the firefighters go to the fire station, pick up the big fire truck, and go. So I'm much faster, of course, because I respond on 90 seconds. I'm on my way to the fire, and they have to go to the fire station, which could be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes behind.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in a hypothetical scenario, which of course happens. You arrive to a fire, and mother's standing on the outside. My kids are in there, and in my rapid response vehicle, I have an SCBA. I have fire extinguishers, and I say, and if I ask the question to the fire chief, can I go inside? Because
no,
and they say no, and I go like, but that's a stupid answer, right? Because they go like, but if I arrive, if I'm not on duty. If someone put an SCBA there, and you're a highly trained firefighter, then the public and sort of everyone expects, well, you should do something if you feel that it's safe. Like, so you go like, when I'm on call, I'm not allowed to do things I would otherwise like to do or even be expected to do. We have this sort of things, and I told them, go like, I think we've made a critical error in when we say you can't do that rather than we can't expect you to do that. And these are hugely different things. So if I look at risk from a public side, so we have a certain amount of money, and we have a certain amount of risk appetite from society. I think that's the difference between you and the world. How much risk sort of society, where trade unions are one part of it. How much risk is sort of acceptable in society? In the West, we typically less, like if you go to all the way, typically we have very low risk acceptance when it comes to work. Typically, you shouldn't get injured at work. That's sort of the outcome. So we have a certain amount of budget. We have a certain amount of risk assessment, a risk appetite, and we say, if we train you to this standard here, whatever that standard is, we expect you to take this risk. Meaning, if you're a plumber, we expect you to deal with high pressure, whatever. But we train you to deal with that. So this is the protective gear we have, and these suggestions. Something could happen. As a plumber or as a roofer or whatever, but we have these procedures. And let's say you have these procedures in the fire service. These are our procedures. Now, where I think, and these are debatable. What are the procedures we should have? What are the expected risks we expect from you? Like if you're a firefighter and you've been trained to do interior firefighting, and we have this resources. We have, 2 firefighters. You have a jet hose line. We've done a dynamic risk assessment. We have the entry control operator. We expect you to go inside and try to fight the fire. Sort of this is we expect that from you, unless you see this and this and this house start to come down, whatever it might be. So we have this expectation where we accept the risk and we sort of expect you to take that risk. And this is the push pull. If you don't accept that risk, you shouldn't be a firefighter. If you're a police officer and you respond to a shooting, we expect you to have your gun and try to do something. That's it's no different. If you're a soldier, we expect you to get out in the trenches and shoot. We expect that risk. Where I think, and again, you could sort of think about what we expect depending on how much training we give and so on. Where I think the meat is we say if we go above that or beyond that, you can't do it. And that's where I think we go like, no. If you have a firefighter, let's say you're at a water rescue, and take that scenario, and your crew has been trained to acknowledge that this is rapid water, this is dangerous, we don't have the equipment or the training to do this. The expectation is you are not trained to do that, you are not expected to go into the water. You can do other things, but you're not expected to. But if someone goes, hey, I think I can do this, you should go, the officer has the obligation to say, this is running water. You're not trained to do this. You're not expected to do this. And the firefighter goes, no, but I can do it. Then, great, we'll support you with everything you need. Because I think where the is because this could be a guy who swims all day long. It could be a kayaker. It could be you go to a hazmat incident. You go you arrive. This level.
We had exactly that, Lars.
Can't do it.
Yeah. Last year we had a flooding in this country, and there was an old gentleman in his 70s, and his car was in the water, and he was literally up to his chest in this freezing cold water in the middle of winter. This was all live on all our TVs here on the news, and there was an operational crew, and the guy was leaning on a fence about 10 feet away from this poor guy in the water, the radio, no helmet on, essentially waiting for the water rescue crew. Yeah. Meanwhile, this young guy in his waders, this young 21 guy, it goes in the water and helps this old guy out of the car in the running water, while the kind of fire crew are all stood by watching this, waiting, all on TV. It's on every TV channel in this country. It was kind of health and safety gone mad. And so, do you know what? It is really, really thought-provoking, that, Lars. How would you bring that about? Well, you mentioned it being a debate. I mean, right at the start of this conversation, we were chatting about the getting the nerdiness up to the right levels for strategic debate. Yeah. I think it's a really good example. So I'm quite a big fan of the Dutch Fire Academy. Yeah. So I think those guys do some really, really good stuff. Yeah. Where they think about this stuff, and then what they then do with it, they publish reports. Yeah. And I'm doing a session on Grenfell later on this year for those guys, actually.
Yeah, great. Ricardo and the guys over at the...
Yeah, Ricardo and team.
Great guys.
And they push that into the government, and they get a debate going amongst the fire chiefs, and they get an active consideration of this kind of issue. Yeah. And ultimately, it's then for the collective of fire chiefs or for the government of today to say, actually, how do we bring that about? And there are ways. So, for example, the police in this country, they have what's called a royal warrant, and they take an oath. And in a legal sense, they're not employed. They're technically sort of self-employed, but because they've got this thing called the royal warrant, which is what gives them the power of a police officer to make arrests. So it's a legal way of both paying them, but giving them powers as a police officer to arrest people, or to detain them, or to handcuff them, or to arrest them. So to deprive somebody of their liberty with force if necessary. Where those legal rights come from is this kind of warranting situation. So if you think about a fire officer, a firefighter, how would you give the protection to the organisation on the individual officer that you described as saying, well, okay, then I'm not asking you to do it, I'm not directing to do it, but if you want to do it, I'm happy to support you. Can you tell me why you want to do it? Well, I just want to be brave. Or, as you said, I'm a kayaker and whatever, and in my judgment, it's fine. Some process, but yet away you go. That could be handled through whatever, a warranting. There are ways that you could handle that freedom. But it has to start up here by getting a debate going that there is a problem. And so coming right back into Grenfell, how do you even get that debate going? There's a problem in the first instance. Well, incidents like Grenfell should be triggers for these kinds of debates at a national level amongst architecture like fire and rescue services. But without something like the Dutch Fire... So there is no equivalent of the Dutch Fire Academy in the UK. The Fire Service College here is run by a private sector organisation, and it purely delivers training now. Yeah. It's not a think... I'm talking about, I suppose, the think tank in some senses, Lars, actually. It fulfills no think tank function. Yeah. We have an inspectorate that fulfills no think tank function. Essentially, all that we've got is the National Fire Chiefs Council, but they are really about implementing policy and tactical things. They are
making more rules.
Yeah, exactly. They aren't really set up to be a think tank. Yeah. And again, that was one of the reasons I kind of modelled my thinking on the Dutch Fire Academy. Yeah. It's a fantastic think tank. UL and this in other countries they're similar, but we see without that think tank, there isn't an entity that brings this stuff together and says there's a debate that needs to be had, and we'll run it. And we're saying this on the one, exactly your point. On the one side, there's this risk stuff, and over here there's this. So what about trying that? Well, no, we don't like that. And having a debate with the right people, and then bringing it to a conclusion, saying we've had the debate now, and our recommendation to the government is the risk has become so bad that you now need to do something. And bringing this right back to Grenfell down, Lars, why I think this should be a trigger. So at about 2 o'clock in the morning, when the most senior officer took over, his decision was now to try and flood the building with as many, because up until now they'd been going to floor by. So when a call came in saying it was flat 113 or whatever, they were sending a team to flat 113 to try and rescue people, or flat 253. They were sending a team, so they were responding almost call by call. Those guys would go in, and your earlier point about they find people on the staircase. Some people died on the staircase. There was they come across people collapsed on the staircase. So the crews going in, because there was a single staircase, were then stopped from delivering their original mission to bring these people out. So they never then would get to flat 113 or whatever. He changed the policy. First of all, he reverted stay put when he took over, and he was the first officer to do that after nearly 2 hours, an hour and 3/4. And his strategy was, I'm going to flood the building with as many breathing apparatus as possible and not go over and just floor by floor, start at the top and come down, or start as high as we can, rather, and come down and go up and meet in the middle. Just knock on all the doors, pull people out, do what we can, just basically flood the building as far as we can with breathing apparatus and get as many people out as we can together. And it was actually reasonably successful. But even there, for health and safety reasons, the crews were reporting that it was so hot above floor 12 that from a health and safety point of view, they were saying to crews, don't go above floor 12. Okay, 23 floors. So there is evidence that crews did go above floor 12 using their initiative, trying to rescue people. They thought could hear people, but in theory, at least, they were breaking the rules, exactly as you said. They were going against the policy. But by the same token, for at least another hour, there were people coming down from 21, 22 and 18. So there were 10 people came down from 18 and 8 people came down for 21 and 22. So there were 18 people came down from the highest levels an hour, for up to an hour after the fire brigade had stopped crews going above level 12. Now, what I'm suggesting is, and I'm not saying it wasn't hot for them, but your earlier point, the way we're training, what's hot to a firefighter in training now isn't anywhere near as hot as it's going to get in a real building. And what Grenfell tells me is if people are coming down for an hour after we've said you can't, and we're in PPE, breathing apparatus, and they're in the pajamas, literally coming down in their pajamas and surviving, that tells me we've probably underestimated or understated what we are the heat that we are capable of absorbing with relative safety. Your point about risk, I think it should cause us to think about that risk judgment differently. And if a fire like Grenfell doesn't trigger that thinking, I'm not sure what would. And the truth is, we haven't really got that vehicle
to have that discussion.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I recommended an academy. It was very much thinking along the Dutch Academy lines, which I think do some excellent work.
Yeah. No, but it is. I find it, and you have to play these mind games. Like that's an excellent example of sort of like, again, you can have I could have two debates. You can have one debate. Was that a good decision? Saying we do not have the training, the skills, the manpower to go above floor 12. I'm not. That might have been the right choice, might have been a wrong choice, and so on. That's the debate in itself. sort of. But that will vary, between, what is our expectation of a first responder with 2 hours of training in CPR versus a fully badass fire dragon slayer nerd. We have different expectations. Maybe we should have this. We don't typically, but we should have different expectations of these two. But a lot of times our system can't handle it, so we treat them the same way because they're just a brick in the system. So we say you can't go above floor 12, regardless of your experience, for instance, which is just like that doesn't make sense. Like the first day on the job, and you've been doing firefighting for 30 years in London. Maybe there should be different what you can and cannot do. But again, that is a separate discussion. I think that's a very interesting one. But the second one, like when that firefighter says, but I think I can do this because I'm not the average firefighter. I think I can do more. I want to risk more, whatever it is. You go like, if you take, it's easier to look at the water rescue scenario. If one of the firefighters in that crew who stood there waiting said, I'm gonna punch out. I'm going to punch out, and I'm on my free time, I will go and rescue this person here in the vehicle. In that case, the officer can go, excellent, now I can support you with all the things I have, because now I'm just helping one of the public do something good. The optics is still very bad because the fire service is not doing anything, but the public are. But as soon as you get in on duty, now I say, not even do I say, I'm not going to support you. I'm going to say you can't even do it. If you do it anyway, I will sort of court-martial you. There is a serious disconnect here between, again, this what we look at risk, and it goes back again. What we can't do or what we expected to do is two vastly different things. Yeah. And if the fire officer is like, okay, this guy here, let's say one guy says, I'm going to do it. And the fire officer looks at this like, this is a cocky person who doesn't understand the risks that are involved with this rescue. I think they have a legal obligation to say, I don't think you understand the risk. You don't understand this and this and this. But if the person still says, I'm going to do it anyway, I think it would be opposite. Now I'm legally obliged to support them in any way I can. Again, with the same preposition that I can't do anything, and I can't expect anyone else to do anything. Now you have sort of this, ethical dilemma of sort of, like if we allow one freelancer to take risks, that jeopardizes the whole operation, because if one of the firefighters do freelancing and got injured, now the whole operation grinds to a halt. Yeah. But again, I have this hard look like this disconnect I see between now you're in gear. Yeah. So now you're not allowed to do things. I'm going to stop you to do things. If you do things, we're going to court-martial you. Oh, now you're out of gear. We will give you a medal for doing something nice for your fellow man. And we'll support you with everything we have. Like that is literally how most systems look like.
Yeah, I agree. I suppose
it's bonkers.
Well, it doesn't make sense to you as a human being, and I would agree with that. The problem you've got, there's a lot of things in life that don't make sense, aren't there? It doesn't mean they kind of don't happen. But I think you really raise an interesting point, actually, for people like me and others. And it is an interesting challenge about handling ethical and moral dilemma in the context of what the laws and us is an expression in the UK. In the context of the legal framework, and is there a need? Is the need big enough to push for change in the law? Because it is that legal balance. Yeah. The common sense says what you just described. If the person, even having been advised, wants to get on with it and they accept they're doing it essentially as a good Samaritan, rather than a firefighter, then why wouldn't you wade in and help them? And why couldn't you have done that when they were in a firefighter's uniform anyway? Yeah. And it's because of all those liabilities that go to that individual making that decision on the ground. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's not the system. It's not that it doesn't make sense. It's that in the past, when it's then gone wrong, the individuals haven't turned around and said, well, it was on my own head, or the family haven't turned around and said, well, they made the decision. what then tends to happen is they either sue or they prosecute or they don't accept the person in the first instance took responsibility for themselves. And so it's a consequence of all those legal challenges that then retrospectively change the law. And I suppose I come back to Grenfell. The only thing that triggers do we need to reverse that is if a problem like Grenfell or some other tragedy occurs where the consequence of that slavish devotion to policy and procedure caused a catastrophe, caused loss of life. It takes an event, something to show the pendulum swung too far in this direction to start a journey back again. Without that event, it is really hard, Lars, that people say, well, has it really caused any problems? Actually, it exists in the realms of hypothesis only. It's not a real problem. Might frustrate the hell out of Lars and his fire nerds, but is it a real problem that's worth a government giving its attention to? That's your challenge, isn't it?
What?
And it's only an event that creates the momentum for that often.
Yeah, from the top. But my experience from the bottom is when I talk to firefighters generally want to do good. Like firefighters want to do good. They are typically risk-seeking people to begin with. It's just been hammered out of them to take risks. Like you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, you shall not do that. If you do that, you're not professional. So it's been hammered out of them. But if you have to do training, and I say, well, if again you take this scenario, if your buddy is lying, 4 meters inside a smoky hallway, and you're the entry control operator, would you drag them out? Like on the personal one, and everyone goes like, sure, I would drag them out. Like I wouldn't care if I'm legal. It's my buddy in there. Like, and if you ask to go like, well, would you if you're in a high-rise flat and it's 5 floors up, it's probably a small fire. Could you run up there without a hose line and do a quick search and rescue operation without a hose line? Go like, no, like, you can't do that, blah blah. But if it's your kid, what would you like the firefighters to do, and what would you do? I would run up without a hose line. Like everybody, they recognize the problem with too limited rules when they put it on their persona. Like when they're like, what would I do? Whatever. But as soon as you get above that level, like when you start looking at a system, it just grinds to a halt.
And I suppose to your earlier point, Lars, about that a bit of paranoia. One of the problems with the system being like that on a kind of an ongoing basis, and when events don't happen, is the default state becomes precaution, doesn't it? Let's not do it. Let's stay safe. I can only speak from my experience of Grenfell. But where on that situation, the officer in charge, a guy called Andy Rowe, who ultimately became the commissioner, accepted completely, if we don't take a radically different perspective, people are definitely dying here. So he did exactly as you said. He got the firefighters together in the base of the tower, and he said, I cannot order you to put your lives in danger. Quite the reverse. Organisation, we've got all these policies that say you shouldn't. But I'm in here, you're in here, people are dying, and I'm asking you to take risks that I really shouldn't be at. So I'm asking you to break procedure, I'm asking you to go in without hose, without water, and I'm asking you to use your own judgment to decide for yourselves where your boundaries are and take risks. I'm asking you all to do that. And if anybody says they don't want to, I fully respect that, and I won't direct you to do it. And those weren't his exact words, but he addressed the firefighters in the base of the tower, and without exception, all of the witness testimony described that as an inspiring address, an inspiring commentary, and without exception to a man and woman, they all said, yes, I'll be prepared to take that risk. And so that level 12 point, it's really difficult to find out, because it was confusion as well, who stopped them, who actually made that decision, because the guy in charge was trying to flood the building. But so there's something about, it's difficult to pin down. But the bigger point is, having made that decision, and then the chair of the public inquiry the law, looking at it in great detail, didn't say, well, the policy said this and he went against the policy. It described that as a bold, unnecessary strategy. So he didn't get slaughtered. He didn't get hung out to dry. Quite the reverse. It was recognised that this was an extraordinary situation. He recognised it was an extraordinary situation. He realised he had to do something different. He couldn't order them. He asked them, like you suggested, Lars, and the public inquiry chair said that was a bold and commendable thing to do. So, you know, actually, it kind of, in one respect, that idea happened at Grenfell. And not many people maybe know about that, actually.
So what would happen if you're a fire crew and you got a commander and go like, you have this discussion, you say, we all think this is bonkers. We want to be able to take a risk if we feel that it's necessary, and it's really not a risk in that sense. Sort of, it's only a risk written by the procedure. This situation is a risk. Blah blah. What would happen if the crew go like, okay, but we have this problem with loss, so we just institutionalized every time we find ourselves in that decision, we just take the day off, and we borrow the gear from the municipal, and we get the job done, and then we get back in duty when we're done. Like that would technically be possible. I mean, there might be other problems to go like, why did you take your day off mid of a job? That could be like fire. You could be fired for that and so on. But like. You have this like you call like you could be a maven in the system.
Yeah. But then so that you also then come into the employees' representatives, don't you? To a trade unions, and again you'll have your own view about whether they're a good or a bad thing. But the point is, you can't realistically ask individual firefighters, "Well, do you want to do it?" Yes, I do. I don't. You just can't function in this kind of, you know, individualistic way. You can choose for yourself whether you book a day off or you take your risk or whatever. There has to be a broader policy acceptance of this is how we work, doesn't there? And so the problem with that
broken, if it's broken, it's broken.
So you then immediately come into, so who do you have that collective discussion with? The representatives of that group of people. And I've found often it's not the staff themselves that are uber conservative or risk averse or whatever. It's very often their representatives and saying, well, never mind what he says or she says, we are saying no, because we're thinking about the risks to the greater group here. And very often they are the bodies that will fund the lawyers that then sue the fire service for this. And so I suppose you get into a bit of a meaning of life debate if you're not careful, Lars, don't you? About you know, who makes decisions in life for us, and should we have our, you know, should we be empowered to make our own decisions, and what rights the government got to tell us what to do anyway? Do you know what I mean?
I don't think there is a conflict.
A deeper debate, I suppose.
Like I have, you know, like there has to be a conflict. So like say you have let's say trade unions they want to do as little as possible for as much money as possible. They want to take as little risk as possible for the workers. Now that is in itself nothing wrong. Like that is a force, and without that force, you might end up entirely wrong. Like so you have acknowledged this is a force coming from here. Now where it becomes a problem if that force is allowed to be all consuming, like the other side who said, let's say we have let's take it like you have an employer says, I want you to take as much risk as possible, do as much work as possible for as little pay as possible. Let's say we take that. Ideally, in the work where this sort of you're recognizing each other's goals and you work together to find sort of like a happy medium, and that is probably better than any extremes. But you also have to have, like, if you go to a trade union, what I would do in that case, it's I'm a maven, I would go like, okay, the trade unions, and I would go to the public and say, these are the ones fighting to not rescue you. Like, I would these are the ones who's working against me wanting to rescue you. Like, when you're a kid in a fire, I can't go in because these people over here will sue my ass off if I go inside. Do you think that's a good force? I would put the pressure on. But I'm combative in that sense that I could do that.
Well, it's really interesting because this absolutely happened during Grenfell. So that whole conundrum, that whole tricky issue was exactly what happened at Grenfell as well. So the kind of trade union, and I completely recognise the legitimacy, exactly as you say, but the trade union were portraying the firefighters as victims of Grenfell. And at one level, they had a point, didn't they? The trauma facing the firefighters, it was difficult. This was an unprecedented incident.
Lack of training and so on.
Et cetera, et cetera. So at one level, in a theoretical sense, you could accept and describe firefighters as victims of that tragedy. But if you'd lost your child, somebody describing themselves, and they weren't injured, they weren't visibly injured in any way, as almost equivalent to your daughter or your son or whatever that perished in the most horrific way, it doesn't land well.
It doesn't land well at all.
So, so there was a real tension between the victims and their legal and collective representation. So there were several groups formed, victims of Grenfell. In the main, the families have got together, and there was a kind of an association called Victims of Grenfell, partly for legal representation, and as you would expect, but also partly as a lobbying force for better social housing, etc. And they still exist. And every year there's a silent march on the anniversary of the Grenfell tragedy, and people wear green, etc. And the fire union always has a big presence at the silent march. And to be fair, there is, amongst many of the firefighters and many of the victims' families, there's a very, very close relationship, and there's a lot of mutual kind of love and respect. But when you bring it up to a level and you hear some press conferences from the families, some of them are very, very anti-firefighters and trade unions, very, very anti-trade union. So that difficult dilemma that you were just chatting about there, Lars, that absolutely played out, and to an extent is still playing out in the Grenfell Tower. And it wasn't the London Fire Brigade saying, look, some of these firefighters didn't want to do. It was the victims saying, some of these firefighters could have taken more of a risk. They should have taken a risk. Why didn't the river stay put? The Grenfell Tower tragedy has all of these conundrums, actually, that we're just chatting about this evening. They are all within this kind of story of the Grenfell tragedy. There is so much learning from fire services perspective at that operational level, as we touched upon, the first crews and how that's going to be, etc. The command decision making, but even the wider picture about the conundrums, policy, freelancing. Have we overdone the risk thing, etc. They are all come out of the Grenfell tragedy. And this is why, where does that stuff really get unpicked, debated, and thinking? And it's great we're doing it on a podcast, but actually, it's, serendipity brought us together to have a chat about this. We haven't got the equivalent of a Dutch academy. That's why these academies, I think these kind of institutions are really, really important to provide a vehicle to have a debate and then take it somewhere afterwards.
Yeah, I think so. No, I totally agree. And if that is, if that is achieved, I mean, Sweden doesn't have that either. I mean, we have the same. We had our national fire schools back in the day, which still exist. But back in the day, they were more like thought leaders because they had resources to do sort of research, and they wrote books and stuff like that. And now they're basically stuck in training. Basic training, not advanced training anyway. It's just crank out new firefighters at a rapid rate. That's basically what they're stuck doing. So there's very little or no development going on, and there's for sure they're not even talking to each other, the schools, but basically because they don't have time. So we don't have that either. It's the nerds who informally sort of exchange ideas, and that trickles out, and there's resistance, and there's, of course, this dynamic process of what happens. But it is this, and I would say the influence is more now is towards like social media and videos, and that is the informal way of creating change. So I think we have the same problem in that. So I would fully, and if I were in charge, I would just cipher, a small percentage of all the budgets from all the fire services and just pool it towards this center of excellence, like this school of fire and all the things.
I'm conscious, blimey, it's 9:45, lad. I'm going to have to disappear in the not too distant future. I'm going on holiday tomorrow, so I've got to do some packing shortly, if that's okay.
I understand.
But this thought is really, I want to hang on to this, because you talked about thought leadership there. I mean, what this kind of the challenges are common, aren't they? You have debates through your kind of podcast. Pete Wakefield tries to do something similar. There's sort of 2 or 3 of you. There's another guy who does the fire science one, which is slightly more technical and building.
Yeah, fire science show. Wojcik.
Yeah, that's it. Wojcik there. There's 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5. Kind of in the podcasting world. Yeah,
in Europe. In the United States, there's loads of them, but Europe is very few.
Yeah, but to be fair, the American ones are probably hovering around the same stuff anyway. It's probably there's an Americanism to that sometimes. No, for sure.
And my problem with a lot of Americans, it's almost, if you try to, they're mostly about culture.
Yeah, exactly. But I think between yours and Pete's and Wojcik's, there is what we touched upon, the academy, and where does this thinking happen, and how do you take it somewhere? I do think there is something about a thought leadership, a vehicle of some description that could be useful. I'm going to answer that, but I want to have a think about that, because I do think, these tragedies should lead to something. There's learning for all of us, yes, but they should lead to something better, shouldn't they, really? Do you know what I mean?
If I were you, I would be cautious of going. So this is the problem. So if I were to be in charge of a school like that, I think I'm right. I want to implement my ideas. So I mean, I think I'm a benevolent dictator. In that sense, I would go like, and like that is, if I am really right, that is great, which is the great thing with the benevolent dictator. It becomes very efficient. The system becomes very efficient until the benevolent dictator either becomes wrong or just malevolent, and then it goes horribly wrong really fast. And I would say like the Nog is like, it's benevolent people. People want to do good. It's just the end result is just, this is too much. It's not helping, because it's the wish list of things to do, and it's not helping. Like, so I think that from the get-go, you have to have this mindset of plurality. With all the problems, it go like if let's say if you do anything, let's say you want to have a thought leadership, you want to have this school of excellence about thermal imagers, whatever, for fire. Yeah. You don't want, this is our training package for thermal imagers. No, go like, here we've collected, Andrew Starnes from America. This is what Andrew Starnes flavored thermal imager. This is FLIR's, company materials. This is it here. Like you package, go like, so that everybody can pick their flavors, and like in the marketplace of ideas, the best idea float to the top. Or like, so you can have this, so like, we have our experts out here. We think that this way is the best way to go. But if you want to pick someone else, be free to do it. Because it constantly shows that this is not an easy topic. This may not be just one answer. This is just the answer we thought was good at this time. And this it shows the plurality, because it does one other thing besides this. I think that this marketplace of ideas, it takes away the accountability of that organization. And this is really important, because what accountability brings is this fear we talked about. Because if we can't say something for certain, we just don't say anything at all, or we make it so safe that it becomes unusable. Like the Nog, we have to write all the things you have to check in augmentum, so now it's basically useless, because by the time I've gone through this checklist, the fire is burnt over and we can just go home, because that's what you get with accountability. So you take away accountability, because you go like, hey, Lars says this, like, don't look at power connections in the building, because it's probably not an issue, and we just hope it's not an issue because you're not going to have time to check for it. But it's Lars saying it, so you don't have to take accountability. That's one thing. The other problem is perfectionism, because everybody, most people that care about something, they want perfection, and perfection means there's very little output. And you need a lot of output. You need a lot of to shake up good ideas and everything. You need output. So if you take away the accountability, you take away this, then you can have less perfect things out there, and that shows to other people that like it's okay to not be perfect, and I can submit my ideas because they're not perfect, and you start to shake more things float to the top. So I think this plurality of ideas, this sort of flavored ideas. Here's, Manchester's training materials on smoke curtains, but his length. We don't have to have an opinion on who's the best. Yeah. We just collect the good ideas and we just let things float to the top.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely agree with all that, lad. I think what's really interesting, you chat to yourself. So this podcast is your contribution to that thought leadership debate.
I just talk to people because I find it interesting.
Yeah, but you do. But you talk to them in a structured way, don't you?
Yeah.
We're not just having a chat about the price of fish fingers. It's a focused kind of conversation. And to be fair, Pete Wakefield, you're trying to do similar things.
Oh, for sure.
Sometimes with the same people, but actually that's okay, isn't it? So you're coming at something for a couple of hours like that with the same people. Somebody else comes at it like that. You've still come at it in a different way, and you've added to a body of knowledge.
Yes,
and pushed thinking on. I suppose what is maybe it's a sign of the times. Maybe the way that we do develop thinking, ideas, and thought leadership today is using the vehicle of podcasts to do it.
Podcast is one way for sure.
Which I think, and there's nothing wrong with that because it makes it digestible. But coming to your point about accountability, etc., I still feel, how do you then take that thought leadership and convert it into practical action that flows? That's the hard stuff, isn't it?
I can say, in my opinion, you just develop good training materials, and most people just adopt it.
Yeah,
because most fire services don't have the skills and the time, the buffer to develop good training materials. So if you provide one for them, they will most likely just use it straight off.
And have you come across anywhere with a better version of Nog that's not too bureaucratic? Or is everybody nogging? Is the world being nogged to death?
No. I think that there's a lot of good pieces. I think that's the thing that I like, again, the plurality thing. You pick the best things of everything and bring it together. Like the Nog, I think when some people talk about the Nog, that was the intention. Like, just throw a lot of good stuff here and just take the bits and pieces you like to the fire services. And some fire services just took it wholeheartely and go like, this is our Bible and we'll stick to it. Yeah. And other fire services in the UK just took certain bits and pieces and tweaked it and made it their own. I think that's more in the sense that, because in that case you go like, well, I think like the Americans are great at thinking about the pre-assignment, pre-arrival assignments, sort of this negative thing. Like typically, if I get a fire, I should go to second floor and do a search and rescue. Like the only thing I have to go to command is just verify that that's what you want me to do, because then we don't have this what you described. When 20 appliances come, and you have a command philosophy that you should optimize all the units. That's not going to happen. But if 10 units arrive, like in New York, when they arrive really rapidly, if they didn't have pre-assignments, it would just bog down. It's impossible. So but that doesn't work for a rural department with one engine. We'll always have the same. So you have this go like, well, it doesn't. That one size doesn't fit all, and that is why one thing that tends to happen is that one large department writes something and a rural department adopts it because it's from London, so it has to be good, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever for a rural department to take mostly things from London because most of the things are different. So you have this go like, but there might be aspects of it that are good, and you have it go like, so this plurality of, you know, like having discussions and about this, and you taking things, well, like, oh, on that platform you go like, here's New York's pre-assigned, arrival. So you go like, look at this, how they structure it. There's a podcast talking about it and development. This is from Netherlands. This is their, you know, like this 4-quadrant model, talking to Ricardo about it, blah, 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 how you adopt it. Like this plurality of ideas and saying that we don't have the answer, but we're the ones who's really trying to sort of collect it and discuss it and, you know, mulch over it.
Have you come across that World Fire Congress? Did you get involved in the World Fire Congress last year?
Never been.
Last year, the year before?
No, never been. I don't know.
There's another one. They're organising one in the UK. It was do you know the Americans have the kind of baseball, the World Baseball Series in America? It was a bit like that, the kind of World Fire Congress in America. It was just from the UK and America. But are you tied into the CTIF stuff at all to any great extent?
No, not at all. I've never been. You know, Sweden is not a part of any. Because Sweden is the best fire service in the world, like all fire services are. So we've never had a need to be part of anything outside of Sweden, unless there's someone wanted to come to us and look at how great we are. So,
but you connect to Ricardo and some of those things just as Lars rather than as Sweden, I guess. Then,
no, because to be and that is I saying with like a cheeky, but that's true. Like Sweden is so stuck up their own ass, so we've never had any intention of being part of international organizations other than just like a side gig from somewhere, our unions maybe are at some level part of the FIReE in Europe, but that's sort of like nobody's ever heard of who that are or what happens there. It doesn't get spread anywhere. It's sort of like a side gig, so we are not at any shape or form anything to look at in that aspect.
Yeah.
Like Swedish firefighters have no idea what CTIF is. They've never heard of it. Don't care.
Yeah, right. I think a bit further. Well, let's kind of keep in touch. Like, I think there is some scope to get some of the. I think your point about plurality is bang on. To I suppose finishing on Grenfell. What I found doing Grenfell was it was the most intellectually demanding thing I'd ever done in my life. And I was a fire chief for 70 years, you know, grappling with what did these folks do? What does it mean? What should they have done? What could they have done? What didn't they do? Why? All those kind of questions. And even though I did 30 odd years in the fire service, I kind of they call it the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, where you realise you start knowing what you don't know. Really, you think, oh my God, I thought I knew quite a bit, and I realised I don't know anything at all. And I suppose it's kind of left me with that thinking about we do need to figure out, and actually modern technology can actually help us in these ways, podcasts, etc. But I do think we should keep that journey moving. And I haven't got an answer to that, but it does feel like how do we keep that plurality of thinking going has got to be a kind of important legacy of Grenfell, actually, because I don't want to be here again in 5 years' time, and I wouldn't want Sweden to have a tragedy like Grenfell or Germany or France or whatever. So the more we can kind of share that thinking and learning, and even if you just walk away prompted to think a bit differently, well, then that's been a good thing.
Yeah, you just have again. There has to be these informal and formal ways of scaling the sort of that happening, like all the things, and like I sort of feel to go like them, go like, oh, this is the New York pre-assigned written. We can't use that because it says New York on it.
Yeah.
So that a lot of departments have that.
Thing,
we have to make completely. Our own, like just because, not because it has to be tweaked. It's just because. That I think this plurality thing, that like, if you go like, it's acceptable to learn from others. It's acceptable to steal ideas freely, to share. Like, just an example. When before I quit my full-time job at the fire station, I tried to get departments around Sweden to share training content, and basically everyone said, great, send me everything. But no one wants to share anything for two reasons. It's labor intensive. like together. I mean, but mostly they're not proud of what they have. They're sort of, nah, ours not good enough, so we don't want to share it. So it was this fear of being, well, you can't have anything, because I end up, you can't have anything unless you share everything.
Yeah.
So I just go like, I have 25 departments with all the training content, all the, lecture plans, videos, everything, PowerPoints, everything, just just dirty shit pile like here. It's not sorted anything. It's garbage from 20 years ago. It's excellent things done yesterday. Like, it's great. But you can't have any of it unless you give me everything. And you can't select the few things you're proud of. You have to send me everything. And then I got 25 departments to sort of switch training materials. And most of it was just utter garbage. Utter garbage. But then you find this, look like, oh, holy crap, that's valuable over here.
Yeah, and then when you put them all together, you get something that's really good.
Then you get something great.
Yeah.
And when you start to pipe, because then you get 25 different departments, you go through, oh, what do they have on animal rescue? Yeah. And you go like 15 is crap, 5 is sort of decent, 5 is sort of good.
But see, originally, that was the idea of the NOG. Let's do exactly that. And take the best, but I think what they didn't think that no, we'll just take it all and just kind of make it all and bigger and bigger to fit it all in there somewhere.
Everyone gets to add their piece.
Yeah, just list another problem, another control measure. Oh, we hadn't thought about that one. You got 785 control measures that the poor guys don't think about. Yeah, as you say, it's a work of theoretical excellence, but not essentially practical. So. Listen, lad, I don't know whether that's, but I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I don't know if that's been of any good to you.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great, Steve.
I generally really enjoyed. I really enjoyed your English. It has been excellent, by the way. Your thinking is really clear. Real credit to you. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I really enjoy. The reason I heard you on Pete go like, I got to talk to Steve because he also has some. He says with conviction, but also guts to say what he thinks. Like this authenticity that shines through, and that's really important for me, because a lot of when you get higher up, especially, you become so afraid of saying anything, so everything that comes out of your mouth is just useless. But that is sort of the norm. You say all these things that sound nice, but doesn't but what does it mean? Like, how should I behave, or what does it mean, or what should I learn?
To be fair, that was an important thing about Grenfell. I thought, if I'm going to do this, there's 72 people rely upon someone trying to tell the truth, and you're trying to be fair to everybody, but that means you just have to stick to a straight line and tell the truth and be authentic. Otherwise, you'll trip yourself up, and we'll see. Right, I've got to shoot, mate. I've got to pack some clothes. Really, generally, look after yourself. Thanks for that one.